it's the dream as a coach, right? You want to come here, you want to say, okay, right, like you put the worst situation for me, I can come up with a solution to this, and it's going to be great, and everything's going to be great. And it was worse than you could possibly imagine.
Right, this is going to be another episode of Summoning Insight. Of course, as anyone who watched any of the past shows, or indeed the live show Monty did would know, brought to you by Esports Bet. There is still time, even though there is no Worlds, don't get tricked by the name, to enter the Worlds Prediction Series 2 competition. You can enter it basically in every big esports game, the CSGO Major. Look, I know TI's finished as well, but there will be Dota 2 tournaments, Rainbow Six, Valorant. But if you don't know, it's not even just Tier 1 tournaments. It's almost any big game and tournament in the speed of esports. FIFA, it's all sorts of smaller games. Quake, I think, is even on there.
Even more League of Legends stuff at the Tier 2.
There'll be some stuff.
Level.
And also, I don't know whether they will offer odds, but put it this way, if you don't know, Chinese League of Legends always has off-season stuff, Demacia Cup, etc., NEST, I don't know whether they'll have those on there, but sometimes they do. So, okay, obviously, if you want to enter that competition, it's free to enter anyway. Anyone right now could already have gone and signed up with an account. But if you want to get a head start on the people who joined ages ago and didn't ever hear this commercial, go to the Esports Bet Discord, discord.gg/esportsbet, message the mod mill, and they'll give you 50,000 DJT, which is essentially 50 times the original entry that you got when you entered for free way back when. So you can essentially sort of like, doesn't matter that you weren't playing since April or whatever, you can just get in the mix immediately. And again, in that scenario, here's the difference between when you actually betting with crypto and when you use the DJT. With the DJT, I would go wild on a bunch of underdogs and pick crazy ones that you think can happen and go all in on big picks, because the idea there is you're just trying to accumulate the DJT to win the up to 300,000 USDT first place, a big part of the 10 million USDT prize pool. On that one, just have fun with it. Maybe even think of it as like test out the service, see if you like it, and then later in the episode, we'll mention some of the deposit bonuses if you want to bet with crypto. Right, Monty, I've actually got quite an interesting, I don't know if you saw this, but normally when a story comes out around a roster move, it's just the most bare bones basic details. Like, right, this team's interested in this player. Doesn't even usually have the price. It's usually just like, oh, they're making a bid, but it hasn't gone through yet. Did you see this story that came out the other day on Blix.GG about the Elyoya move? So I thought we had to discuss this, mate. Like, I've never seen a story. It's very well done if it's all true. In terms of the sheer amount of detail, like this guy actually managed to cover like the whole year's sort of scenario for Elyoya. And in doing so, I have to say, the first thing you come away with as conclusion is, holy fuck, whoever's running Mad Lions is incompetent. Like, they just fumbled the bag over and over again in this story. Like, I'll give you some details, guys. So it says that actually between the two splits, because remember, Mad Lions failed the spring split, if you remember, didn't make playoffs. So after that split, it just says a European club offered 2.2 million euros for Elyoya, who, by the way, contract ends at the end of 2 years from now, so in 2024. So what's wild about that is, first of all, it was implied Mad Lions was trying to extend him past 2024, which is in 2 years. So they're just trying to lock him in for like, what's the max you can do? 4 in
three. So I think you would have to do a 1 year extension from now would be the maximum. I'm pretty sure players can't have active contracts longer than 3 years.
So they wanted to just lock him down, basically. But it's made clear in this article, not only is there interest, but he wanted to go. Now, what I find interesting is on that first detail, when they just say a European club, well, logically, it wasn't G2, right? Because G2 had Jankos, they won the split. Could it have been Fnatic? They had that Razork thing going on. Yep. Could it have been Vitality? They had the situation when they wanted to get rid of Self-Made. These seem like obvious ones to me. Now, here's the key detail, guys. We can put a pin in that in a minute and go back to it. Like, interesting. What if someone signed it for 2.2 million euros? But this is where Mad Lions fumbled the bag. It's like, guys, do you not know what's going on in the world outside of esports? You're not paying any attention. Do you not know what's going on with the economies? Because this is the mental part, Monty. Because they turned that down, now a lot of fans are going to go, well, they got to Worlds. It was the right move, right? No, because since Elyoya still wants to leave and doesn't want to sign an extension, and even it's implied by the way they phrase it here, it wasn't just like, I'd like to leave. It's like, I want to leave. Like, I need to leave. I want to go to... It's like that. You can see they suddenly all of a sudden get really motivated in selling him, right? So then the detail goes... With teams tightening their budget, right, Mad Lions decide to explore the market for Elyoya. Initial asking price, 800,000 euros. Now, you don't have to get an abacus out here, guys. Right, 2.2 million turned down. Starting price, 800K, right? already that should be where, no joke, whether they sell him or not, or whatever they sell him for, whoever runs Mad Lions, if you just heard what I just told you right now, you should be having like a sit down. It's like, right, we're going to have to run through our whole org. We're going to have to find out where the point in the circuit broke, like what went wrong here. Because dude, and by the way, the spoiler is, as it's implied here, they're not even getting that. And now there's this whole thing where who the fuck knows what's going to happen. So, mate, this looks really bad.
From the information I have, I think he's probably going to stay on Mad Lions. I knew some of the details of this, but not all of them. And also, you have to consider that he's probably on a pretty low deal for Mad Lions because he's still on his initial deal that they made with him. I can't imagine that he's taking that expensive for them. So with the market going down and them not being able to get this $2.2 million buyout, I think they probably just keep him until the end of his contract or try and sell him at the end of next year and see if there is more of a market for him. I think the problem here is that 2.2 million is excessive, I think, by any standards. Like Schalke got rid of Abadage to 100 Thieves for like around $1 million, I think, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. $1 million has been like a pretty standard buyout.
Dude, bear in mind, this is only buyout, remember. We're only talking to pay the club to get it. This is like perks money, mate. This is the sort of shit you pay for like the guy's superstar to go to LCS.
So my thought is maybe it's more because his salary is low. So that's like most of the cost would just be the buyout at that point in time. But it is very weird that this would be, double what some other players would have cost. And I wonder if that's why people were turning it down. It seems like it returning to 800K is more a normal value, I would say, for a buyout, not 2.2. So it seems like things have come down.
No, but here's the problem, Monty. The buyout was never 2.2. They were offered 2.2. That's the part people are missing. They had 2.2 in their hand and they went, you know what? I reckon I could get 4. And then like 6 months later, can I have 800K, please? And then the ridiculous thing is, because if you don't know, guys, this is a multi-bag fumble. Then they start the price themselves at 800K. So G2 goes, brilliant. Yeah, actually, I want to get rid of Jankos. Can I have Elyoya? And they go, did I say 800K? I meant 1.1K, 1.1 million. And then G2 just goes, no thanks then. So then they're like, it's all right, guys. We got Elyoya still. Like, this is so whack. Like, you guys don't know business. Like, what I don't get about this is one thing I'm sick and tired of, Monty. Because I always say there aren't real businessmen in esports. There's like the ones at the absolute top of esports in a real industry would be in the middle, because obviously a lot of them only started 10 years ago or the last couple of years, or they came from some other corporate world and this is where they're sort of flexing their muscle. We don't have like super wheelers and dealers like you have at the top of sports. And the reason is this. One key principle you must know in any negotiation is who has the leverage and how can it be exploited. If there's only one person bidding, you can't just keep putting the price up and up and up and up if they can say no. They can just leave that at any point in time and then you're just a fool. Like, it's not like some fucking bidding war in an auction. You can just take the end offer. Like, this is one area I find so weird, because if you don't understand, if you're a fan, the key detail you're going to miss on this story goes like this, because I want to talk in a minute about some of the G2 angle as well, because as usual, the nephews are actually just wiling in a way that's so outrageous. Basically, Monty, the logic of the League of Legends community goes like this. If I like the player and think he should go to a team, you should sell him for peanuts. But if I actually don't like your org, you should just pay through the nose no matter who you're paying for. It's like there's no rhyme or reason business-wise. So the key point that people are missing business-wise is this. If you are teams like Rogue and Mad Lions, you want to sell these players for as much as possible. Now, the key thing there is, I know you don't want to sell the player. In the dream world, you'd keep all these players, Inspired, Larson, Odwamnet, of course. But the point is, if the big org comes and they're going to pay, this is a perfect example right here, Monty, way over the odds. Like, they're going to pay probably twice what they should pay. You have to take it. Like, I'll just make an analogy to when we do the bets. Sometimes we take bets on teams we do not think are going to win. But I'll tell you what, if there's a team that should be 2.5 odds, Monty, and I can get 5 odds, I'll just take that all day long. Because the logic goes, if I accurately assessed it was 2.5, and I take 5 odds like 50 times, in the long run, I make out like a bandit. I don't need to know that they'll win. They will, as long as it's 2.5. So the maddest part about this to me is, like, if you're Mad Lions, like, there's only one way this ended. You either looked like a genius and someone did bid more than 2.2, or you just ended up looking silly like this. Because that was the other thing. Because there wasn't some insane buyer's market where it's like people are going crazy with the bids. It wasn't it was the other way around, rather. It wasn't the case that when you said no to the 2.2, someone else was like, well, I'll do 2. You know what I mean? It went from 2.2 to nothing to 800. Like, this is like, There's no logic here, because here's what you have to think of if you're a fan of Mad Lions. Yeah, it'll suck to lose Elyoya. He probably was the best player on Mad Lions, by the way. It's why I kept saying the whole time, it should probably be Elyoya who's the MVP if it's from that team, not Nisqy. Spoiler, did he like Worlds, cocksuckers? That's who Nisqy is. That's who's been his whole fucking career. I know, listen, I like I Will Dominate Stream too, but I don't have to believe all the things he says. So then what I would say is this: if you like Mad Lions, the best thing that could have happened would be they sell Elyoya for 2.2 million euros with their coaching staff. Dude, they not only could get someone who's like 80% of an Elyoya straight away, but then they could even have re-upped like another bit. You could have got like an Armut replacement. Dude, you could have probably got Odo Amni yourself. You could have just had him come to your team, get an Elyoya, but suddenly you're in business. You might win the next split. That's what you actually wanted, because this isn't an org that has the billions and billions. Like, you have to get the money from somewhere if you want to compete with G2, and you can't, by the way, as Rogue's shown you, but through successfully pivoting, you can't rely on one good lineup, because as soon as your lineup gets too good, this happened in Counter-Strike for years, Monty. The small team can never win by just getting a good player, because the big team can buy the player. You always have to win by being smarter and shrewder with your deals.
I mean, for what it's worth, obviously, like some people over at Overactive Media, the ownership group around this, have actually denied that they received any kind of,
This is all speculation, of course. We're not claiming that we corroborate the report. We're just going on what's publicly reported.
Right. So they have, just to be clear, they have denied it and said, Mad Lions has never sought or received any offers for Elyoya prior to this year, but I don't think the claim was it was prior to this year. I think it was halfway through this year, and I think it was Vitality, like you're saying.
Oh no, what's great about that, Monty, is this is a new trick in esports. They've taken it from politics. The clever thing you do is you deny something no one ever claimed. So I'll give you an example that's going on in CSGO. In CSGO, there was a big furore over an obvious conflict of interest that the guy who owned G.G. Bet, a betting website, has bought Na'Vi, and he now owns Na'Vi and a betting website. Right, here's how Na'Vi addressed it publicly. It's a total lie that G.G. Bet owns Na'Vi. Can you see what they've done there, guys? That's just called basic misdirection. Like, no one ever claimed that. And what's better is you've even sort of lied in the gist, because the gist of it is, well, yeah, I wasn't concerned about the company owning it. I was concerned about the guy who owns the company. And him, by the way, he has even more of an interest in some sense. So, yeah, that's like the new move, sadly, because as you say, this entire article says it's about 2022. It has nothing to do with any past year. So the problem is, though, here's why it works, though, Monty. An idiot's not going to think through what you've just said. They're just going to go, oh, they said the report was false. And it'll sort of have the effect, but they haven't technically lied, but they'll have the same effect as if they had denied it outright and it was legit, you know?
Right. And they said it wasn't for 2 million, and they haven't received an offer or for 2 million. So for what that's worth, the org denies it. Also, Elyoya's contract actually expires at the end of next year, so he only has one more year on his deal. So that's probably
that would make more sense. I think
to extend him.
Yeah, I think the problem there is I think they just miswrote that in the article, because it sounded weird to me. Like, why would there be? Because the pressure obviously would be if there's 1 year left, and next year, if you're a fan again and you're casual, here's the problem if you're Mad Lions. Not only does Elyoya have all the power in his hand next year if he plays well, like he can just leave for free at the end of the year, but that means that the second the spring split begins, you're not only now really courting anyone who wants to buy Elyoya, but the price is going down as the weeks go in. Like as the split goes by, suddenly it'll be like 400k. It might be nothing at the end because it becomes nothing once he gets to the off season. So that's why it would make way more sense that it's the end of next year. Like it just seemed weird that it said 2024. That's why I asked how long are these bloody contracts?
Yeah, it's November 20th, 2023 is when
might be a typo on that.
Yeah. So look, I think the whole thing sounds ridiculous. People are saying it did and didn't happen. I don't know. I haven't myself heard. I've known about some of these like possible Elyoya moves because I know he's been such a hot commodity during this off season, and he has been sought out by G2. I know that's true, but I don't know about a previous buyout attempt and what the buyout attempt of that, the amount of that could have been. So very, very interesting if that did in fact happen, though. Seems like, especially Mad Lions, that hasn't had an issue selling players and then finding new ones. I mean, Mad Lions is the team that punches above their weight when it comes to the amount of money that they spend. And I would assume that as long as Mac continues to be there, that's going to continue to be true. And they haven't wanted to spend, and that's totally fine. A lot of other teams prefer to operate in the red. Mad Lions, I think, has gotten great value out of the rosters and the amount of salary that they're willing to put down for their players. So I would have thought they would have sold him. I would have thought they would have sold him. As
then
you
we'll
say,
flip it the other side, because obviously the brilliant thing here is the team that wanted him, G2, had their own reasons to want a jungler, didn't they? Which is they want to get rid of Jankos. And by the way, they've even done that in a really interesting way, where like they haven't just said like, look, we're open to offers, but you know, let's see, maybe we keep him. They've sort of made it clear that like, look, we want him out no matter. This is like when they kicked Reckless, if people don't know. Like I had heard behind the scenes from legit sources, oh no, we're kicking him no matter what. Like whether someone signs him or not, a year playing for G2 again. That's almost the weird vibe you get from this. And I've heard behind the scenes, like maybe they cater to Caps now. Caps runs the show. I mean, he's the obvious person left that you care about. So maybe he just doesn't want to. But this is what I can't handle. So at the same time, guys, everyone's talking about what a scum org G2 is. By the way, G2 trying to buy this guy for like that amount of money. Meanwhile, Jankos, who earlier this year, if you even go like 2 weeks into the summer split, everyone was still saying is the #1 Western jungler, easily the best in Europe. He's looked great in the spring. He's even having some Smurf games in summer. Right, this guy, now when he's going to be sold, right, supposedly the asking price is only €1 million. And everyone's going like, oh, they've got him in prison. This is fucked up, man. Like, first of all, he re-signed with G2 previously. He chose to be in this position. And then secondly, this is the maddest of all, right? So people are offering millions and millions for Elyoya, but we can't get 1 million for a Jankos that in this scenario is like 6 months removed or 4 months removed from being one of the best players in the West. Now we're all going to act like he's washed. That's a totally reasonable. By the way, I wouldn't at the beginning of the offseason, Monty, be putting my price much lower than that. I would wait and see, because in my opinion, someone buying Jankos is the last piece to make themselves like a championship roster. Like that's how you go right to the top. It's even a scenario where who knows what your mid lane is like. Maybe that makes your mid lane look like 1.5 times better next split. Like I think that's a piece that absolutely you can sell for that. And quite frankly, I'll just put this out there. For all this talk about G2 being a contract prison, first of all, don't tell me it's a prison when you get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to not play video games, you fucking imbecile. It's like my joke on Twitter, like Reckless reading through a copy of Gulag Archipelago going, they don't know how hard I have it. Oh, what's that? Another 100,000 this month. Yeah, put it in the back room. I'm not playing League at the moment. Give me a fucking break. And then secondly, I'll just throw this out there. The reason why it's so whack, because it's all anti-Carlos sentiment, by the way, that came way before this. It was mainly because of the perks and the reckless moves where they were popular players and Carlos pissed people off with the way he dealt with them. Right, here's how you know it's just anti-Carlos sentiment. Which player ever did end up in prison in contract in G2? Reckless didn't. That sort of happened. By the way, Reckless himself admitted on stream, Monty, that the reason he didn't get to a better team, like a non-ERL team, is because he didn't want G2 to make any money, and then they didn't want him to like go to certain teams. It's like, so he admitted he was being a twat as well. So I don't even know how people are sad about that one. And then secondly, you have the scenario where Mickey X was briefly in contract prison until they sold him to XL, which turned out to be like a career-changing move again. It seems, I mean, he's even coming back for fuck's sake. Guys, they all hate G2 so much. Mickey X is coming back a year later. Are you kidding me? And then how about Wonder? Remember that? No one wanted Wonder. That was not. He only went to Fnatic, the team we were told no one's ever allowed to go to because of Carlos and he even went to fucking Fnatic. Like all these players got sold to the teams, not necessarily that they wanted it first, but to top teams. And by the way, about the best teams in those scenarios you could have expected. So the real joke is this. I'll just flip it back. And this is where you're all going to be in a real quandary because you're all going to think, yeah, but G2 is evil. Oh, no, wait a second. You all love Fnatic. Mate, I actually saw, I'm not joking, comments that were like, I guess the only ethical org left is Fnatic. It's like, my God, they don't even know. They don't even know. They're just bad at being unethical, you morons. That's why they have to flip it that they're the virtue signals. Everyone's poaching. How do you think you got all your rosters for about 5 years with Expectia? So here's the angle, Monty. I remember someone who was in contract prison for quite a long time. His name was Niski. He was in Fnatic contract prison for a whole split. He couldn't play. And then what do you know? He eventually got sold to Mad Lions and he was able to go to Worlds. So basically, if it was up to Fnatic, who knows? Maybe he never even went. So the joke is, Rogue does refuse to sell to people in Europe and sell to America for millions and millions and deny people a chance, by the way, to go and make super teams on G2 and win everything. People like Fnatic do lock you in a contract prison and go, no, till they pay, you don't get out. Yeah. Meanwhile, G2 thus far has never locked anyone in contract prison as far as I can tell. Yeah, has anyone?
Yeah, it does look like they're going to be shopping Jankos around. And I think Jankos has said that he only gets about 40% of his salary if he's benched. But I don't really feel bad for him, guys, because everybody's like, oh, they should pay him his full salary, fully guaranteed. I'm gonna make some other arguments for you here. One of them is that Jankos is a very popular streamer, and I would imagine he can make more than money this way because he'll have 40% of his salary plus be able to stream full time, which will definitely get him above the 60%. He's a huge streamer, right? So it's actually probably financially beneficial for him to be full-time streaming while on a 40% rate. Secondly, for those of you who are arguing, the players should get paid 100% if they're benched. Let me tell you a story about Overwatch League where the players all had guaranteed money. Players routinely in Overwatch League would bench themselves because they didn't want to play and because they didn't want the pressure.
The team had like a losing record, it was going really badly. Yeah.
The players would start to bench themselves and the teams would be on the hook. And we could never, ever, ever say which players were benching themselves. We just have to be on broadcast when I was broadcast. Whoa, this guy's just not playing this week. And the teams never made any announcements and
by the way,
never held accountable.
The maddest one, because I can say this.
So fuck anyone who says these players should have guaranteed money. It ruined like 2 years of the Overwatch
here's the worst
league.
one. The worst one, I won't say the name, but if you know Overwatch, you might be able to guess. The worst one was a guy benched himself and just went back to Korea while still getting all the money.
Yep.
That's mental. He wasn't even on the continent. Wasn't even sat in the other room like waiting to come in. He was like, see ya, I'm off. So anyway, here's the other thing to say on that, Monty. Right? First of all, what does that even mean? Have you noticed? I said this years ago, I nailed it. The most annoying thing about people who know nothing about a topic is the word should. What the fuck does should mean, right? Hey, guy who's making a team where you lose millions of dollars to put together one of the best teams in Europe so I can watch a really good match of a video game. You should just pay him more money. For what reason? You just should. I feel as though you should. Who are you again? Just a guy watching the game, but I think you should. And you know what? More than just I think you should, which is a perfectly fine and valid opinion for a pleb to have, you're a piece of shit morally if you don't. Morally? What moral precept have I violated? Just morally, you're just a piece of shit human being. What is this? What narrative are we coming up with here? Because think of this. Here's the checkmate, Jankos. If you're watching, homie, here's the checkmate, my dude. If it's 40% and that's so little, just tell us what the 100% figure is. As soon as I know that, maybe I feel sorry for you. Spoiler, I don't feel sorry for you if it was like 30K a month and then you got 40%.
Also, Jankos, at the same time, why don't you go ahead and tell us how many Twitch subs you get and what your revenue per hour of streaming to 15,000 concurrent fans is. And we'll do a little math for you, okay? We'll do it. So we'll calculate your per hour streaming money right now. We're going to multiply that by 40 if you're a full-time streamer. And then we're going to see if the 40% of your salary plus that number is higher or lower than 100% of your gamer salary. Should be easy, right? There you go.
Because another thing is, look, I'm actually going to do some content in the off-season with some like agents where I probe them and ask them some tough questions and give them their chance to say their part and give their perspective and all that jazz. Because one thing I'm really sick and tired of, Monty, I notice they all do this as well, right? When they're talking about like a 27-year-old or 25-year-old pro, like years in the game, 3-4 contracts into the thing, getting paid millions of dollars, got an agent, by the way. You notice they never mention that part. Got an agent, someone who's literally full-time their job to negotiate his contracts, figure out what terms you care about, make sure you agree with these terms. I've got a lawyer here and everything. We all agree that we're all signed the same. No, what they make it sound like, Monty, is that in 2022, Jankos is a 16-year-old kid who just turned 17 tomorrow, and he gets taken into a bar by some shady G2 executive in a fucking raincoat who goes, come on, kid, sign on the back of this fucking lap, kid. I give you everything. I'm the devil. Like, that's not what's going on. The joke about this is, and this is my comment on Twitter, where the fuck are the agents of Regress and Jankos? Let me know that right now. I want to see those guys coming out explaining what a bad deal this is. Because what's great is I can just reply to that guy, just as I did to this other guy on Twitter, and just go, okay, explain what you mean by that. What pressure did someone put on? Because someone was saying, like, they put pressure on people to not have an agent to join their org. Said, if you haven't joined their org, what pressure could they put on you? Madly radio silence things. Oh, you mean they just said to you in words, please don't join with this agent? Like, there's so much fuckery on that topic, because that's the thing they always do, Monty. They always use the word kids. Because when you hear kids, you think of that 17-year-old who's like, oh, why dad, what's going on? Reckless, you know, Reckless is like 10 years deep in the game, guys. Jankos has been a top player since 2014. It's mental, innit? I know.
Look,
like, at what point in time are these guys just innocent babes in the wood? The real thing that pisses me off is this, Monty. I've actually, for real, known top pro players that were friends of mine that I begged to take different terms on deals. Because I knew, oh, you're never going to handle these streaming hours, mate. Oh, come on, get a clause in your, literally, you're getting so much on this deal, take a bit less and ask for like a no trade clause or something. You can't be benched or something. And they were like, nah, I'll never be benched. I'm really good. They never do it. All pros do is this. I want the highest base salary. Base, by the way, a load of them will even turn down like great deals that are structured like quite fairly. You know, if you don't make playoffs, you get less, but if you make playoffs, you get 1 times. They all want the guaranteed base money. And if they get that, they just wait. And half the time the joke is they don't even know what the rest of their contract is. They never actually were listening.
Yeah, and look, I think that there's two different things that are happening here. So one of them is like, I think Reckless has been complaining more from, I haven't watched every second of Jankos' stream, but from the clips I've seen of Jankos,
wasn't really like hardcore complaining. It was more just explaining what the situation is. More his fans that took it and ran with it, you know.
Yeah, I actually haven't heard Jankos really complaining about it either. Like, I think he's just been very forthright about it, and it seems to me that his core desire is just to continue to play professionally. So, as far as like calling Jankos out, I don't think, you know, I think there's a point that we made. We're just using him as a
stand-in for any pro that complains about contracts in this scenario.
So just let's be clear about Jankos. Like, I don't want to unnecessarily antagonize him. I think he's probably still making great money. I'm just saying, like, it's not, I don't think, too big of a deal in terms of a hit to his finances. But at the same time, you know, I think one thing that would probably be helpful for players is having a cap on their buyouts. And that's something that can be negotiated within their contracts so that you don't end up in a situation, if you really want to play professionally, or you put a timer on the buyout, right? Where you say, after the buyout begins, it can be whatever you say it is for 3 months, but after the end of those 3 months, it has to go down to this cap or something like that, or it has to be reduced by X percentage. I think there are mechanisms you can put in place so that you can make sure your competitive career continues. Because I think we all want to watch Jankos play next year. He had a great year overall, and it's a bummer and also weird that this is happening with G2, frankly, because I don't think he was terrible by any means, and I think he was pretty instrumental in some of their success. I think part of this is that Caps just renegotiated a 3-year deal, and there's probably something with that. So Caps is now contracted through the end of 2025. That means that he is the centerpiece of G2, guys. They wanted to get him on a long-term deal before anyone else. I imagine that was extremely expensive. And also, they either don't have money to maintain some of these contracts with some of these big name players, or Caps has said he doesn't want to play with them. Like, one of these things must be true, because otherwise it doesn't logically make sense why you would get rid of Jankos, and also potentially Targamas, who I think had a phenomenal rookie year. It seems like there are some weird other forces at play in what's going on with G2.
I heard that the Targamas one is that Hans Sama wanted to play with Mickey, and that like they're reuniting that bot lane, and that was why that move's happening apparently.
Fair enough.
By the way, the one I do want to pivot to is the Reckless angle, because I thought his was the silliest of all. Again, funnily enough, actually, if you actually listen to what the players are saying, by the way, they're not the ones complaining that much. It's more that when they drop, here's the problem. This is what stands are like. You know what they're like from the K-pop and owl world, mate. You don't have to actually say, like, I'm really upset about this. You can just go, that sucks, doesn't it? And then they go, see, I could tell, because they're all like way too parasocially involved. They're like, I could see it was like breaking his heart inside, and I could, you know, I knew that we had to speak on his behalf and stop this org. So basically, right, on the Reckless one, he said one of the stupidest fucking premises I've ever heard, where he said that if he was to get benched, his salary went down to 6%, Monty. But he admitted himself, are you ready? You'll love this. This is almost like comedy that you'd admit this yourself. He admits himself that he signed a shitty contract, and then he actually used the line, proving what I said earlier. None of it would have mattered if I'd have smurfed. You fucking idiot. You're signing contracts where it's only good if you smurf. What are you even saying out loud? Like, the dumb part about that is, like, if people don't know, bearing in mind that move was to replace Perks and make Carlos look like a G, you had G2 over a fucking barrel. I guarantee you Reckless could have gotten that up to like half or 25% or 40 or something. If that was his one condition and he was willing to take a little bit, like, he could easily have renegotiated that deal. That means Reckless, this is the point I was making about them not being innocent. You do know that when you get past, here's the thing people might not know, this detail might change something for some people out there. You know, when you get past the contract, do you know why they make you on some contracts an initial every page, guys? To show you've actually fucking read it. You're not supposed to do it like installing Windows, like, oh, scroll to the bottom of this, accept all terms. What the hell? How am I supposed to know? Like, this is a deal worth millions of dollars, and you're not even having either a lawyer read it, agent read it. You don't read it yourself and figure out what's going on.
There's a couple things here, right? Like, even if your agent, really wanted you to sign this, because if fighting back against this clause would lower your potential payment, right? So they could say, an org might say, for example, well, I'm going to pay you $1 million, and if you get benched, you only get 6%. But if you negotiate, they might say, well, if you want more of a guarantee if you're benched, then we have to lower your rate to 800K, right? And if you're relatively confident as a player or as an agent that they're not going to get benched, then you might not take the lower deal. Or your agent might, in fact, advise you to not take the lower deal because they get a higher cut of the $1 million, right? Or they get more money, the same percentage cut, but they get more money if it's $1 million. Now, there are two other things, or the second thing, rather, is that if you have an agent, you should also independently have a lawyer to review these clauses for you and go over them.
Oh, no, none of them get that part, mate. They're all acting like their agent. They don't get, by the way, that at times, as Monty alluded to with the buyout, sometimes your agent can have a conflict of interest in this scenario where he might gain more from certain deals than the one that you want. And you think, well, he's just working on my behalf. Yeah, in theory, but sometimes there's just a crossroads, like you're saying, where they'll incentivize to go a different way.
Are good lawyers expensive? Yes, they are. But if you are a millionaire, paying a good lawyer $500 an hour, or whatever, $5,000 to go over your contract can be worth its weight in gold.
Mate.
Because you have to remember that in that relationship with a lawyer, you are the only client, and they're not going to get a cut of the contract. They are merely reviewing it and bringing up any problematic terms to you, in which case you can make a decision then in coordination between your lawyer and your agent and, the team you're negotiating against. So I don't understand necessarily why players don't do this. Maybe they did. Maybe they did do it, and they just have questionable lawyers, or maybe their lawyers were like, you shouldn't sign this, and then they signed it anyway. We can't know, right? We can't know.
I mean, in his case, as far as I know, like I said, he admits that he just signed a bad contract and just thought, well, that'll never affect me, which is what a lot of pros, unfortunately, do think,
Yeah. So this is all just industry stuff, and it becomes very silly. I agree with you. It is kind of funky that this continues to go on. Should we talk about the World Finals that just happened a couple of days ago? Because I wanted to knock out some of the historical.
Don't want to talk about it with Peter?
Oh, we can talk about it with Peter too. Because
I'd be very interested to see what his take is. He usually has his own sort of take on which lanes they run through and how they play the game.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to get before Peter came on was just to talk about what this means in a historical context.
Well, it probably is the greatest fucking underdog Cinderella run of all time in League of Legends. Let's be real.
I mean, it's fucking insane. I'd be curious if you think it is how it ranks up in the rest of the entire esports universe as well, because it must be among the most impressive across all esports.
Especially because, some of this is specific to the Riot circuit. Like, let's be real. If this was like Dota or CSGO, DRX would be at Worlds anyway, just by virtue of being like the sixth best Korean team. Like, from the major region, that's how it works in those games. But in League of Legends, a game where, I remember it was only a few years ago, we even went to 4 slots. So that means a few years ago, this run is literally impossible. It could never happen. But in a world where you come from the 4th seed, like, this is the key detail you have to understand. It's mainly the circuit that makes it impossible. What makes it impossible is, with the way the playoffs went in Korea, they weren't supposed to even get out of the regional.
No.
Then they get out of the regional, then they were in the plains, remember? There's a world in the plains where they were supposed to come second. They managed to beat RNG, so you've already exceeded expectations there. Then you go to the group. Look, that group on paper you are supposed to come out of. You're supposed to come out second place, and it's supposed to be like battle rogue for second place. Instead, you battle rogue for first place. Okay, you get first place. By the way, first place gets you the reigning world champions. That's already not like easy, but okay, not the end of the world. By the way, I will say there were still people. Jensen had EDG winning and maybe even going to the finals. So it's not like everyone thought that DRX was going to win that one. But then the Gen.G one is impossible.
Was the betting underdog in that match.
They were like 2.5 to something, yeah. And then the Gen.G one on paper, if you just look how the year went, that's the most impossible of them all if people don't get. And then, oh yeah, I forgot to even mention, and in the EDG series, you even get that mad inhibit, so you're down 0-2. You have to reverse sweep and basically win like 4 games almost. Then you beat Gen.G in a 3-2 one, in a mental one in itself, where again, the maddest thing about that one is, just like the EDG series, first 2 games, it looks like you're going to go down 0-2, you're losing again. And then you go to the finals, and they're always fucking behind in the series. They're never the ones leading. So like the amazing thing about this team, Monty, was when they were winning the games early, we all identified like, yeah, they're actually really good if they sort of like get a bit ahead. Mate, this team actually showed a mad flaw when they were behind as well. Like the amount of games they were able to hang around in, the amount of times where the other team led and they sort of just like, normally it's the great teams that do this, not like the flukes. Normally it's the great team that can sort of like know in a game where I'm not doing that well, if I can sort of just hang on long enough, you might make a mistake and let me back in the game. Dude, they were doing that to some of the best teams in the world. It was crazy to me. Like, I can't believe any of these matches. Like, even when I think back now, they shouldn't win any of these games. They shouldn't be at Worlds. They shouldn't win any of these series. So it's got to be up there with one of the all-time ones. I think so.
I mean, yeah. Look, even as far as underdogs, because to describe this to you, if you guys didn't watch the LCK, in a nutshell, here's how it was. This team was 9-9 in best of threes. They were 22-23 in terms of maps. So they actually lost more games than they won in the summer split. Most of the games that they won came in the first round robin in summer when they were playing. I'm sure you guys probably saw either the games or the highlights of like Kingin with his like flash ult Ornn engages, or you saw like Kalista Mumu dominating the game from Deft and Beryl. And then they really struggled with the meta as it came later on with the kind of Zeri and Sivir compositions. And I think part of this, in retrospect, is that Deft was a very low economy AD carry for this team in a meta where high economy, it was a lot about high economy ADCs, right? If you actually take a look at the summer stats by ADC, Deft is the lowest gold percentage ADC in the entire league. So it made it even lower than Ghost. But he was still, when it came to actual damage percentage, he was like middle of the pack in damage percent post 15. He was right in the middle of the league. In CS percentage after 15, he was lowest in the league. So Deft was getting a lot of value by kind of like being slightly behind in lane early and then not really getting any resources from his team, but still outputting much more damage than you would expect from the gold that he was receiving. And this has really gone back to, I think Deft historically, like if you're a newer fan, you may not even know that Deft truly struggled in lane, even when his team was winning titles in Korea. When Samsung Blue in 2014 was good, and they would go up against Samsung White, he would get his cheeks clapped by Imp in lane.
Yeah.
And like not die one time, like die 4 times, and then win the game because he was so good at team fighting. Samsung Blue was a late game macro team that team fought well and came from behind. And he later improved a lot in terms of his laning, but that was only after he went to China and went to EDG. And so if you didn't see the beginning of his career, you wouldn't know this. So he brought up his laning a lot, but he was down. I mean, he was negative CS, negative XP at 15 minutes in lane, or at 10 minutes rather, in lane this summer. And that's surprising because especially early on, he was doing very well in lane, picking lane bullies like Kalista and doing really well. So this guy, as far as Deft's narrative goes, this really was kind of a return to Deft. He did get more damage by percentage and more gold in this world championship than he did during the summer season. But I think it speaks to a broader meta shift that was very, very good for DRX, in that he wasn't the highest economy ADC. He wasn't the highest damage ADC. And it was a meta that rewarded players that were high gold and high damage, like Prince and Aiming on KT and Live Sandbox. Now, how did they get through the qualifier when the qualifier was on the patch that they were bad at? Still an absolute fucking mystery. I think maybe the pressure caused the other teams to choke, but they were a huge underdog.
Both of the series they won against teams that were both better, KT and Live were both 3-2s as well, by the way, guys. Even in that, it was like, how are they squeaking through this? And then I'll give you one more stat in line with what you're talking about, right? In the LCK, not a single DRX player was one of the 3 all-pro teams. So before you go, well, wait a minute, that's just because it was probably like Gen.G. No. There were literally 4 players from Live Sandbox got on one of the 3 teams, and 2 players from KT Rolster. Not a single one. So all of you going, I always said Zeka was brilliant. No one else thought so. Nobody else. Maybe in China he was popping off every now and then, but like. And then the other thing is, you want to go player by player, mate, right? Kingen. If I told anyone before the Worlds, Kingen wins Worlds, and it might be a top fucking meta, nobody believes you. Everyone says, look, sell, no way. And then how about the Pioshik one? Probably one of the most streaky junglers ever to play League of Legends. A guy who can be good one game and utter trash the next. And on top of that, he even did that thing that in a way I sort of love, but it's fucked up, which is like, you just can't play all the meta junglers. So you just say, fuck it, I'm just going to start picking shit I like. Like, I don't believe in any universe he like innovated the meta. He was just picking what he could play. Like, he was sort of backed into a corner. It just worked like shit. It's like that joke about Zanzare and LEC, you know, where everyone was trying like 200 IQ the draft, but it was forcing him onto like popping. He's like, this is actually the one thing I'm good at. Like, shit. And you're like, why are you doing, you know, like, why are you doing this to him, guys? Like, it's like that. So the idea these guys win, it's like, it's just impossible to believe in it. I know.
But I think it's absolutely outrageous, because if you were to go back in time, Wolf and I were laughing about this at the end of the finals. We were saying like, this is actually just, we were just like, I can't believe this actually happened. This is so surreal. Wolf was saying to me, he's like, I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and be like, oh yeah, T1 won Worlds. I was like, no, it didn't happen. But we were joking, because like, imagine if we could go back in time and talk to ourselves before regionals and say, oh yeah, DRX is making it to Worlds. And then also DRX wins Worlds. And also Zeka is going to be basically the MVP of the entire tournament. And Kingen is going to be MVP of finals. And he's going to play against Zeus, and he's going to be MVP of finals. It's just outrageous that you would ever believe that. And that's why everyone was saying, like, I would like DRX to win. It's such an incredible story, but you cannot be intellectually honest with yourself and say anything besides like 3-0. Basically.
By the way, you know, at the end of that Deft piece, now it looks even better that I sort of left it open-ended, like, what are you going to show me now, Dex? Deft, what's next? Now it sounds like I was opening the door, like, oh, anything's... But I just thought he was going out in that match in the semi-finals, obviously. Like, that's why I made it come out right before the semis. It was like, you better get this shit out. He's losing the next match. Like, no one thought he was winning. That just now aged beautifully, because that's just called fucking wordsmanship, boys.
I mean, I don't even know really any kind of parallel. This is just such an insanely
Here's
unlikely
the statement
story.
I would make, mate, right? Because this is what people aren't going to get, right? I'm not joking, Monty. I don't care that they just won Worlds. There's no universe, if I'm DRX, I would keep this 5-man lineup. Like, anyone who's thinking, and then the momentum of myths, you know, they're going to win the next split. Like, they're not. I'll tell you right now, here's the statement, right? They're not going to win the next LCK split. They're going to go home. In fact, I'll predict they're going to come like 4th in the next LCK playoffs. That's it. There you go. And a bunch of them are going to come back down to earth. Like, maybe Zeka ends up being better. Maybe he can continue on as a good player. Maybe Deft's still legit if he plays there. Beryl was always half decent and had good like draft pick. But Pioshik's never going to be the best jungler in LCK. And there's no way King and some monster play. I'm telling you right now, there's no way they're the best team in Korea.
I mean, they're not even going to be a team next year. Literally, all of their contracts are ending on November 21st.
And they'd be smart to sell, by the way. Let's take it back to that original convo. This is a Mad Lions situation. If you are DRX, you sell all these players for above their value. By the way, even Deft. Now, you're not going to get another Worlds out of him. You may as well sell him for as much as possible now. Sell them all.
They have 2 weeks to sell. So if I'm the players, I mean, I don't agree to any, like, you know, unless there's a contract extension coming with part of the sale, right? Unless you can negotiate between the teams a buyout price, and then the players and their agents negotiate with the new team a contract extension simultaneously. I don't think anybody sells. I think they're just going to all hit free agency. But that's the wild thing, guys. You can
that even
tell
implies they didn't believe in the
did not
team.
believe in this
exactly.
team. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So does that. You can tell DRX didn't fucking believe in this team because all 5 of their starters were not extended prior to this tournament. Nobody, like, maybe they rejected it, but you would objectively have to be kind of dumb if they were offering you a bunch of money not to take the offer because your value isn't going to be there. Now, congrats and believing in yourselves that now potentially you have huge value. I'm sure Zeka and Barrel in particular and Deft will probably command a high price in the open market. Maybe some Chinese team will pay King and Pioshik the big bucks in order to make a move over to LPL. But I think it's just ridiculous that this roster is going to instantly explode after this. And I am kind of sad in a way because part of me wants them to return back to earth to, in a way.
See it happen to show the nephews.
Well, yeah, Papa Smithy brought this up when we were doing the watch party, but he was like, I need to know if this team is a patch Zerg or not, right?
Oh, I'll give you the analogy. You know, when I always say, Monty, you'll love this. You know, when I always say that Cloud9 fluked the major in CSGO because like they weren't supposed to, by the way, even be in the finals of the Boston Major, but to beat FaZe, that was actually the one team that was their complete kryptonite that they could never even win a map off, right? A lot of people don't know this detail. I'm going to make a video on it one day, Monty. They think it's like, right, they always, people always truncate history in their brain. They take like the big points and they just draw a straight line between them. So a lot of people naively think this, Monty. They think what happened is Cloud9 won the major, and then Stewie2K just went straight to MIBR SK, and then Skadoodle retired, and then eventually Tarek came as, no, you're putting like tournament after tournament. They kept the same exact lineup that won the major for like 3 or 4 lands after that, Monty. Spoiler, they did fuck all. And even better, they lost to FaZe Clan every single time they played them. So like the great thing is, I'm not even speculating like, oh, wow, they sort of fluked that. It's like, if you literally did like a graph, like wins, losses, like what the tournament's like, that's like the one crazy outlier up here, and the rest's just like, what more do you want? Like, I know. The joke is I've got the control group on that, boys. Like, so like, I think it's the same thing. If you look at what they were like before Worlds is the outlier. I'm sorry, it just was. By the way, one thing I'll give them mad props for is somehow they did manage to hold up under all the pressure. That's also very rare that the underdog can keep it going. But again, do I think that would have happened every time? Unlikely. And also, spoiler, now you'd be the favourite, wouldn't you? And by the way, if you're not the real favourite, that's why being an underdog's only good temporarily. If you're not the real favourite, but you get told, like, no, you are. Like, you're the best team now. Dude, they would crumble under that. That's really hard to... Because you can't possibly live up to it, can you? You're not Gen.G. You haven't got all the star players.
Well, I do want to give DRX, I think they would be better next year than they are this year, if only because I watched their macro dramatically improve over the course of Worlds. We talked about them a lot as being kind of like the most technically old school Korean style team where they play this very slow, suffocating, objective focused game and make very few macro mistakes in the late game. Which is still true, by the way. They did extremely well. And I said in our pregame analysis that one angle they might have to win is to kind of accelerate the pace of the game and try and repeatedly force fights around the dragon. And indeed, that's where they were able to get multiple souls throughout this last finals. I think it was a key part of the way they won the games. But their macro did, at a fundamental level, look a lot different than it did in many games throughout the LCK regular season. And I don't know why that is. I think Barrel's shot calling is very good, and perhaps the players were not investing their complete confidence in him. There's obviously always jokes about Barrel being unmotivated to play, but perhaps at Worlds he stepped up his practice and therefore improved his kind of shot calling and in-game abilities if he was trying to peak really hard for this tournament. I think he without him, this championship like just doesn't happen, which is very, very interesting. And it's not even because he is a super good individual player. He's not. He is a versatile player who understands macro and who can pull out the right kind of slightly off meta picks that
He's
are very
idiosyncratic player, isn't he?
Yeah, but I mean, here's the thing: like that Bard pick was good. In like, it's not meta, it's not a meta pick, but it was funny because Papa was like shouting for it while we were watching the draft. He's like, pick Bard, and then he blocked in Bard. He was like, holy shit, I didn't think he'd actually do it. But yeah, it turned out to be a really excellent pick into their composition. And I think it's that level of game knowledge that's being brought over, and Barrel's confidence in using some of these picks that is very effective for him as an individual player.
That's also, by the way, I'll throw one last factor in as well. I hadn't thought of that as well. Technically, in light of what you're saying, they also must have known they're probably never play with this lineup again. So actually, in that sense, it had a last dance quality to it, where it's like, if you don't know, this is also a famous quality from Counter-Strike. Once you know the team's dead, it resolves all like problems in the team, because there's no point arguing with this guy. I'm not going to play with him in 2 months. So what you tend to do is just go, fuck it. Let's just do what we can in the last tournament. And sometimes you get like a miracle run. That does sometimes happen.
Yeah, and I know when we talked about this earlier, you said that you thought there was still a lot of pressure on them, but they already exceeded everyone's
I didn't know that detail. That's the problem, yeah.
They already exceeded all expectations coming into this event, and they were constantly expected to lose. And when I think it does relieve some of the pressure, and because they knew the team was basically over at the end of this anyway. And the funny thing is, the deeper you go, the more over you know it is, because there's no way this team can afford these players. Like, as soon as you make it to the finals with DRX and with Zeka's performance at Worlds, Zeka's almost certainly gone, right? And so, you're probably not going to be able to play with him again. Deft is probably almost certainly gone. And then you win the semifinals. It's like, well, we're all definitely gone at this point, or most of us, by probably like 3 to 4 of us are probably gone. And then you win the finals. It's like, who the fuck on DRX is going to afford this anymore? The Chinese teams, the LPL teams are going to come in and just throw money at these players. Some of the other teams that might be trying to make a bigger investment for next year in the LCK are going to throw money at these players. It's just, just that the last opportunity to do something. And I think it really like paid out for them. So it's an extraordinary moment. Honestly, I think it's one of my favorite moments ever in esports. I've been watching esports for 20 years, and I think this is one of my favorite all-time moments, because it was truly so incredible. And I just don't think we're going to see an underdog story like this again ever in League of Legends. It would be very unlikely.
No, I mean, if you just even look, the amount of times that once you get to like the semis, especially, it's like really predictably boring who will win. And like I said, look, it didn't happen, but the other world was like, there's a world where T1, I mean, maybe if they'd won game 2, this would have happened. There's a world where T1 just crush you. It's over, and everyone's going, shame Gen.G didn't. In fact, that would be the main thing we'd all be complaining about right now. They fucking ruined the finals, Monty, stupid DRX. Like, you should have been Gen.G, then we would have had an awesome final. And we would have just been all complaining that Faker won an easy one over DRX. Like, that's the problem. You can't win, by the way, if you T1. That's how you fucked if you do, you fucked if you don't. So,
and by the way, we haven't talked about this yet, but last week at a press conference, they announced that there wouldn't be double elimination for Worlds because all of the biggest sporting events in the world have single elimination, which is just a appeal to antiquity, logical fallacy. It's like, just because that has been done doesn't mean that the same rules apply to esports. It's not a physical sport. You can play more matches, kind of ridiculous. Also, you might see real sports move to double elimination in the future. Who the fuck can know? But regardless, another argument that I've seen floating around is like, the DRX story proves that single elimination is good. It's like, no, it doesn't, guys, because if DRX faced a murderer's row of teams in order to win, including the top 2 teams in their own region, in order to win this final, which means that they probably would have won in double elimination as well. Like, maybe not, but you can't say if an underdog team wins in single elimination that it doesn't work that way. Now, here's the argument you make. If T1 had smashed DRX in the finals 3-0, then you might say, well, DRX probably wouldn't have made the final in double elimination. And that would have been true, right? If you want the underdog story. But the point of double elimination is to avoid those scenarios where a team gets a very preferential matchup or has a very good day and then ends up with that victory. And then you end up with a final that is complete garbage. We ended up with a great final, which can happen in single elimination. The point of double elimination is just to help ensure that you have a better match in the finals.
By the way, here's all you reply when someone gives a really stupid point like that. Doesn't make any sense. When that John Needham guy goes, yeah, but all the biggest spots in the world have single elim. You just go, yeah, but they don't have yordles. Listen, we have a saying in English: ask a stupid question, get a stupid answer. Like, what's the relevance, John Needham? If you don't know, fans, what they're doing right there, they've done 2 things simultaneously that are such classic Riot behavior. One, you notice they've managed to pretend the rest of esports doesn't exist.
And also their own esport, Valorant, which has double elim in their world championship.
They managed to pretend it doesn't exist. They're like their only guide they could look at, they couldn't look at all the years of esports, other esports that are successful, formats that people have been cracking. They can't look at that. They just can only look at the one touchstone. Oh, sports. And then think of what he's saying. He didn't even give the reason why. He didn't go, well, the thing is, like, it would be a great reference point if he said most major sports use single elimination, which I like for insert principle A. By the way, it could be something like that. I like it to have a lot of tension around every playoff match with no extra life. I want teams to not have a chance to like adapt. I want to actually see in the moment, like intuitive play, who adapts like, in the moment the best and can sort of walk the time. These would be great reasons, by the way. I wouldn't necessarily pick them and agree with them, but I could respect someone who argued that way. And if you said all of that, that'd be great. But instead, he just sort of went, well, Riot Games actually operates on the cargo cult philosophy. So since sports has it, then we're going to do it. Therefore, by transitive property, we're going to be like sport. Because that's what he's implying if you don't get, guys. He's implying that like the NFL is mega successful because it's single elimination. That's what the inference is.
And by the way, guys, you can just detect this as bullshit. And the NFL would like to do different things because the NFL realizes that the more NFL games they are, the more money they make. Guys, they just upped the number of games from 16 to 17 for this very reason. They had a whole negotiation with the NFL Players Association about adding an extra game. The players would get paid more money then, and it was a tense negotiation because the players know an extra game means they could get hurt and end their careers. You are a psycho if you think that the NFL, if there were no penalties, if they could somehow convince the Players Association to move playoffs to double elim, the NFL would do that 1,000% because the amount of extra money the NFL would make on those media rights deals would be astronomical. It would be, they want as many playoff games as possible, right? And
that's
you would think that Riot would want the same thing.
That's why I know where we're fucking up here. We're still trying to address Riot, right? You know what? This is where, you know, in comics sometimes, Monty, like even though Lex Luthor wants to kill Superman, I don't know if you know this, it's a famous trope that if someone else seems to have killed Superman, Lex Luthor goes mental and tries to kill them because he's like, I wanted to kill him. So every now and then he will actually work together with Superman, right? If he has to. So the premise goes like this. Here's what I actually need to do. I need to just say, you know what? I'm going to put that whole like evil country thing to one side. And I've got to go direct to the top of Tencent. And when I get there, I just got to have a sit down and go, look, I am esports. Esports is a story. No, 20 plus years of the game. You know what? I've got one thing to explain to you that I think maybe has been lost in the communique from the Riot Global Office and Tencent, by the way, a company I respect very much, you know, the way you enrich the Chinese economy. I'd just sell that line, obviously, right? And then what I'd say to them is this, obviously to help the Chinese economy and help China grow as much as possible, I'd just like to point out that if you had double elimination, you'd have like X amount more games minimum at your tournaments, which if you were to take basic averages for the viewership would mean actually, you know, the event goes up 10 million viewed hours for the same amount of time spent. And then they'd be like, oh, thank you very much for this. I just have to make a call to Riot Global. Hello? Like, give me a break. Like, dude, I want to know if those guys know that because those are the guys who are actually getting wrecked on this deal. Like, if they want raw numbers, like, by the way, how could any game stand against League of Legends if it had a double elim format, all those matches, all the story? It would be unbeatable as a game.
Look, Ben, I'm willing to sacrifice. Right. We'll make a deal. I'm willing to sacrifice double elim at the World Championship, but you have to do two things. You have to make MSI not fucking suck and have a real format at MSI where we get multiple good teams from the best regions in order to duke it out. There's number one. Number two is you have to add another international tournament so that we actually have more international competitions so that all the best of fives we get are not just fucking, you know, single elim at Worlds. And number three, you have to fix Worlds groups. Please, for the love of God, like run TI style groups or something like that. So we have more groups games at the very least, or turn groups into best of threes or do something because we can't continue to have this. There are ways that we can make single elim not suck at Worlds, but it requires a lot more other things in order to make that like an acceptable compromise. We can't just continue with one team per region at MSI, infinity garbage group games into a very short playoff bracket, and we can't have infinity garbage group games and play-ins, these small groups which create weird seedings, and then have that seed into a bracket. If we had like two groups of 8 at Worlds, right, and then we had them seeded properly, then we could create a properly seeded single elimination bracket. But off of 6 games and tiebreakers, you can't get good seeding. You can't get good seeding. Like, what you want, guys, is you want a single elim bracket where the first team in Group A faces the 4th team in Group B, right? And that's on the top side of the bracket. The bottom side of the bracket is the first team in Group B and the 4th team from Group A, and then 2 and 3 on those sides, so that you actually have a bracket where you're likely to get a good finals, for example. So do those things. And we'll be okay.
You'll never convince idiots. They'll always go, but if you were the better team, you would have.
Oh, God,
you can never defeat that thinking, unfortunately. You'll never defeat it. You'll never defeat it.
These are the same people that think they're just going to randomly be a millionaire one day. They're like, oh, I'm just down on my luck right now, but that one day when I get really lucky, yeah, save mentality. All right, do you want to get Peter done on, and we'll talk about the series a little bit?
Yes, but here's the thing. Speaking of getting it done, if you want to get extra crypto to bet with on esports bet and you've never done a deposit before, you can get their standard deposit of 20%, 50% up to 200 USDT. 50, not 20, 50. So it's I've 2.5 times it there, right? 50% up to 200 USDT, or the alternative they offer. And by the way, you would have made out like a bandit if you'd have done this on the final for the DRX, like we'd said, is they also have the 100 USDT bet forgiveness, where up to 100 USDT on your first time, you can make a bet. If you don't win, so in this case, if you'd have bet on DRX, you would have. You go to message the mod mail on the discord.gg/esportsbet, and you say that Last Free Nation sent you, and they'll give you up to 100 USDT back. So what we always say on that one is, I'd suggest if you do that, put it on an underdog. So in this case, if you'd have put on DRX, you would have gotten like 3 point something, if you remember. It was like 3.6 or something ridiculous. So you wouldn't have needed the bet forgiveness. And if T1 had won anyway, as expected, you would have got the 100 USDT back. So that's just an interesting way you can use that. Right, play the music and bring on Peter Dunn. Right, we're back with our guest, Peter Dunn, formerly of Evil Geniuses, a guest who I would actually describe as being whitelisted on this show because we very much enjoy hearing his thoughts about everything League of Legends. And of course now, no one knows where's he going after his adventure at Evil Geniuses. Maybe he'll hint at it, maybe he won't. Who knows?
I mean, all I'll say is, NDAs, non-disparagement clauses aside. Lucky,
he's locked up. He's locked up. He can't tell you about the past or the future. He's totally fucking useless.
Yeah, completely useless. I feel very lucky to have been on an org like EG, where public appearances were determined through kind of agency screening. You can never trust players or coaches to make their own decisions about values or opportunities, available.
By the way,
Peter, if you could, how would the PR people make money? If people were capable of making their own intelligent public decisions, those PR people would just be out of a job. And wouldn't that be a shame, Peter? Wouldn't that be a shame?
Exactly. And, that's definitely nothing to do with my non-disparagement clause. I just want to say, I just feel incredibly
in a theoretical universe, there are many things that could have happened, Peter. We're not saying they did. They just could have.
Funny enough, on topic, actually, as a particular PR person who just doesn't understand esports and really know esports, actually might have gotten an org that maybe is connected to this conversation in trouble. We'll see in the forthcoming weeks what videos are on the Thorin channel with 3 O's. But anyway, that's just to one side. That's a teaser. Right, actually, before we get into like the EG stuff and LEC, what I want to ask Peter is, I know you've been a long-time viewer of the LPL, and obviously in the heyday, Deft was one of the top stars of it. What were your thoughts on DRX winning Worlds?
I mean, it's unbelievable, right? Actually, I'll be honest, my thoughts on DRX going to Worlds is I'm really sad I couldn't see Prince at Worlds because they beat them 3-2 in the gauntlet, and I was really looking forward to seeing Prince against international competition. But obviously, yeah, like you guys were saying earlier on in the show, it's completely impossible, right? It is actually completely impossible that this could happen. And I feel that, it's an amazing story, and it's like one of those situations. There seems to be they're coming to get me. There seems to be there seems to be. What was I going to say? No, it seems to be that it's one of those things where if you're playing Football Manager and you ran this save once, you can never get the save to come again if you were setting up all of the games. So I mean, it's completely insane that something like this happens. I went back to go and watch all the Zeka VODs I possibly could, just to make sure that I hadn't just overlooked this guy and he hadn't really been that insane all along. and he just massively overperformed. Kingan in the final, he still doesn't know what a side lane is, but he team fought like incredibly well and outplayed Zeus in the 1v1, which is also incredibly impressive. And yeah, I mean, pure sick. It was very funny actually in the fourth game after the Baron was stolen. They never flipped a single Baron for the rest of the game. They just every single thing after that was just a bait for the rest of the series, and that was actually quite amusing. So it was a great story for sure.
I mean, I just love the creativity in the second rounds of the draft, right? The last two games rather, because this is a team that really reached back into the bag of tricks, because if we remember how DRX started in play-ins, it was DRX using Jungle Maokai that really pushed the pick to the top of priority before people realized, oh yeah, we can basically just get Sylas and get a more powerful Maokai ult, especially if we're going to hit level 16 on the Sylas. And so that really eliminated that. But because of the way the drafts went, and because that the Azir and the Akali had already been selected, it made an opportunity in order for them to counterpick with the Maokai without the Sylas being a factor within this game. And then in the final game of the series, we talked about this a bit earlier, but taking the Bard against Varus Victor makes it extremely difficult for that backline to do anything without getting hit by a Bard ult. Also gives you just crazy mobility around objectives. Also loved the Hecarim pick, in picking it into this composition, because you can really disrupt the Gwen and the Viego with the Hecarim. So all in all, a lot of picks that we thought might be higher priority. We came into Worlds thinking Hecarim's going to be picked a lot. We left group stage thinking, oh, the Maokai is really strong. And as teams found answers to this, they sort of fell off in terms of priority. Hecarim was never really there. But in particular situations, DRX was not afraid to kind of go off the script and really pull out some extremely impactful picks that helped them ultimately seal the world championship. So I think props to them. And Song, who was a former Najin mid laner and then ended up being a coach for a number of years, particularly across LCS teams like TSM and Team Liquid before going back to Korea, because these drafts were, I think, fantastic from them.
For sure. I mean, obviously they were helped a little bit by the meta. Wait, wasn't Song the coach on Immortals, on that Immortals team that were 17? Yeah. I remember him from that. I agree that their prep for this tournament was really good. But also, again, as you guys were discussing earlier, the fact that I'm pretty sure that 90% of teams would have mentally crumbled in that second game, after the second game that they had in semis, where the inhibitor was where Deft was about to kill the Nexus. They'd had a long fight back from a completely
in quarters. Yeah.
Oh, in quarters. Yeah. Sorry, of course. And having that kind of mental resilience is obviously completely insane, right? So it was a very, very impressive performance right from players. It does raise an interesting question though in players, which is, should you have World Championship winning teams going through your playing stage, playing against all these emerging region teams? But
I mean, here's a wild one for you, Peter. If you now think about what the play-ins were like, as you say, where lesser teams have to battle, you had the MSI champions, and now we didn't know it, but the world champions were in the fucking play-in, in the same group even. Yeah, live. That's wild.
And also, you could have argued that RNG maybe would have performed a bit better going with the a lot of the group had COVID issues, right?
Yes, of course, a lot of them did. Yes.
You look at RNG, they literally look like they're not fit to play, right? And how well would RNG have done if they'd had enough time to scrim properly, prep properly? Were they even 100% fully fit, right, going into their quarterfinal game? So yeah, just an interesting aside. But yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the strongest play-ins that we've ever seen. So glad we were in the other group.
Was there anything that stuck out to you about this DRX team at all? Because going back, I know you watched so many games. And I was saying their macro, I think, really improved over the course of Worlds. Mm-hmm. And they were one of the most reliable teams at closing out games when they went ahead. They didn't make, a lot of significant macro mistakes. And that was, I think, a very, very powerful part of their victory.
So I think the big issue that this team has is that they're very comfortable in 2-lane setups, but not very comfortable in 3-lane setup. and they found a way at this Worlds to kind of semi-funnel Zeka with King dropping sideways. But they weren't actually. If I had to say there's weakness for this team, the weakness for this team is that they're very good at transferring pressure from King side into Zeka's side, but they weren't very good at transferring it back, right? And I think there wasn't enough time at this Worlds maybe for people to fully realize what they were doing, or maybe people were overconfident, or who knows what to say. But I think that if this team was to continue playing for a couple more months, people would find ways to trap King on weak side, or they would find ways to contain Zeka, because what was going on a lot is you'd have situations where Zeka would play side, he'd push to river or just past river, he'd go to mid, and then obviously they transfer into Zeka's side, and then Zeka would just stay there or just stay in front. Or if he would go back to mid, King wouldn't go back to his side. They just stay as 5 in mid and just contest mid aggressively. And this was really, really good. Obviously, in the teamfight meta, obviously we talked about there's been a lot of patch changes coming into Worlds this year, and this kind of play, the risks associated with playing like this were much lower at this Worlds than at previous Worlds. But it was just interesting to see, King, and there was a game he played in the finals where I think it was the second game, he had Camille into Aatrox, and he was ahead, and Zeus was still providing more side lane pressure than he was. So I think that was the main issue that they had. But obviously their team fighting was very crisp. They had no fear. And for all my criticism of King and side lane play, he team fought like a god in that final. So that was very, very impressive. For sure.
Well, it's also that they were so focused throughout the series on trying to stack the dragons and achieve soul for many of these games that it helped if they were able to take some losses onto Kingen in order to, sacrifice that in order to get position on dragon.
Yeah, for sure. And also like sometimes, how do I say this? So sometimes teams have a 5-0 setup on dragon, or sometimes they have 4-1 setups. But the thing that was very impressive about DRX is that they were able to switch freely between a 3-2 and a 4-1 setup. So what that means is sometimes you put one person on the flank on a dragon setup, and then, but it's very easy if you know that there's 4 people around mid and 1 person on the flank. You just collapse on the guy on the flank. But what they were doing is they would send normally PureSick to like reinforce Zeka on the flank, so that they would have 2 people on the flank. And then that would force the enemy team into a position where they weren't necessarily comfortable because of the amount of resources that they had to allocate to both sides. And I think that was something that they did really well. They were really good at putting one person, sometimes PureSick, sometimes Kingen, being kind of that flex person in dragon setups, which was I think another thing that they did really well. They helped with their team fights.
By the way, before we move on and talk about the other stuff, one thing I also want to ask about was what are your thoughts on Gen.G failing to win Worlds when they were such a lot of people had them as like the de facto favorite? I'm just going to quickly get a drink, but answer that, please.
Yeah. Gen.G. What would I say about Gen.G? I would say that it's back to form now. I think a lot of people were talking about how Gen.G were a team that you couldn't trust going into best of fives in spring. They kind of proved their doubters wrong in summer, but they're a team where they kind of hit you very, very hard, but if you manage to show resistance, sometimes they struggle to break teams down that are able to resist them, right? To handle their laning phase. Obviously, it's people will place the blame on Chovy, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. Yeah, sorry.
No, I think in terms of placing the blame on Chovy, look, he really underperformed in that semifinal versus DRX, but he didn't underperform for all of Worlds, and he was pretty stable and consistent. I think the pressure really got to him in that moment because we saw him revert to pre-Gen.G Chovy, where he seems like he's playing with blinders on at some points in terms of macro, won't join his team, isn't listening to them. But also, we have to talk about Peanut and Doran just massively underperforming because they were much bigger problems throughout the entirety of Worlds. They beat Damwon kind of in spite of Peanut and Doran's performances in many ways. And then when it comes to the actual, the next stage in the semifinals, it was the same. It was the same thing again. And I think the burden on Chovy was just too much at that point in time. And I think especially with how those games were going and how frustrating it must have been to see like Thorin dying in lane. He just tunnel vision because he thought he had to carry the game himself and that he couldn't rely on his teammates. And I don't know how you solve that, because that was the old Chovy way, and we saw that mentality really change, I think, with score coaching and with Peanut shot calling over the course of this year. But if that's what happens when the pressure is the highest, it's not a good sign of things to come.
Yeah, I think the other thing to say about Gen.G is that they are a team that is very by the book, and they often rely on Peanut to do creative things sometimes, right? You know, sometimes you need to have variations. You know, you can't just do the highest percentage play on every single kind of play, because teams know if they study you, they know how to adapt. And I think that this is Gen.G's biggest weakness as a team. Like they'll try to do things by the book, and they rely on certain individual players to take initiative, to go to kind of break teams down that understand their setups, right? And that I think is the biggest loss, right? So Peanut obviously didn't play well. Like I'm not going to defend Peanut here, but it cost Gen.G a lot more because of their reliance on him to be that kind of X factor in the late game, right? Because of the champions he's playing.
Right, here's the joke. Obviously, one of the other problems they had was that when Peanut got into a really tricky situation, he was in the semi-finals, and he was thinking, "Oh, this happened to me last time. Like I was in a game 5 of a world semi-finals. Like, oh, I need to sort of what can I do differently?" He turned to his coach and he said to his coach, "Coach, what do I do?" But the problem is his coach was Score, so Score just went, "Fuck the final, mate." And then he saw it went. So there you go. You know, what can I tell you?
I mean, that would have been an awesome storyline as well, actually, for Score. Oh,
yeah, it would have been awesome. He could have redeemed all the demons. Instead, Peanut gave him more demons. Exactly.
I'm so sad. I really wanted Score out of everybody to win Worlds, just because, you know, his one shot at it with like real shot at it with KT ended so unfortunately poorly against IG. And then, of course, IG just goes through semis and finals without losing another game. And that's why we need double elimination, guys, for matches like that. So, I mean, if you guys want, you know, super boring finals where the best two teams face each other in quarters, then I guess you love single elimination. But if you like exciting finals, maybe, and there's a reason why. Speaking of, there's a reason why this finals is probably the best finals in League of Legends history. It's not because it was the cleanest, guys. I mean, realistically, DRX probably should have not taken 5 games to win this series. They should have absolutely won game 3, where they got 2 Barons stolen against them, including the second Baron where there wasn't even an enemy jungler alive, which makes it even more confusing about how they could possibly lose that. And then even some of the games where you know, it took a long time to win, such as game 5. Again, another like freak Baron steal occurs. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't necessarily the cleanest series of League of Legends that we've ever seen, but it was really fucking exciting. I will give you that. It was thrilling to watch that game because of how crazy it was. But I think realistically, we probably, if we had double elimination, we probably would have had another good finals along the line. It only looks good in comparison to the crap finals we normally have in this esports.
I tell you what, if we're also talking about people who had like this was a big blow to them, this Worlds, like Faker, obviously, T1 as an org, generally Zeus, this was his chance to be the king of fucking League of Legends, obviously the Gen.G players, you can go down the line. I'll tell you who I feel sorry for. No one else out there sparing a thought for this guy. Can you imagine being Fion, having to take that 75% written Faker wins his 4th Worlds title, and just with one take coming down, just put it, not even just put it away for next year. He knows there's no next year. Just putting it into the fucking shredder. You know, that first paragraph, you have to understand he's had 10 cracks in it. The way he would describe the way he killed Ambition as he was doing the Kazakhs evolution. You have to understand at this point, it would be like Barishnikov. He has mastered his craft. And all he wanted was this one last magnum opus to send him out on top. And DRX had to ruin it. Fucking Pioshik, little Pioshik from the LCK had to ruin the whole thing for everyone.
It's all right. I think he can just swap his narrative pretty easily to the Deft. I mean, he loves the underdog angle, and you know, it is special for Deft to win this. Also, Deft is now 2-0 over Faker in major international tournaments because he won with EDG in the first MSI in 2015. If he wasn't the reason why they won, but it was also another insane 5-game banger where it ended. The game 5 was they baited out Faker's undefeated LeBlanc and then ended up beating it with Pawn's like mid Morgana counter pick. So there is a pretty fun series. Like now that we've had 2 like 5-game bangers in international finals that were 7 years apart, it's pretty fun to think about those 2 players' histories. There have been some good moments.
I mean, also it's Deft, right? Like nobody can hate Deft. When they beat EDG on Weibo, the fans aren't even flaming EDG like they normally would, telling them to fly home. It's literally tons of people say, "Oh, we didn't want to lose, but if it was to anybody, I'm glad it was to you, Deft." Things like this. And you just can't hate that guy. I mean, he fought his way to the end. He got his final. He managed to get the crowning achievement on his career. Good for him.
Also, Peter, by the way, that actual MSI loss, if you remember, did spawn one of my greatest video titles of all time, which is, it wasn't just like, I'm critical of Korma the coach. The title of the coach, Peter,
I remember this.
Korma is ruining esports history.
Because of Easy Hoon.
Because of what Easy Hoon of like 2 of the games or whatever. I know. And the best part is, are you ready for the punchline? That actually got back to Korma. That was the title. I love it. Because obviously in that scenario, you think you're just like on the other side of a TV that they can't hear you when you shout at them, can you?
I've said before too, but Koma also gets really salty about that stuff. He's actually one of the most fun people to drink with because he just goes, he goes hard and his real feelings, he's very strongly opinionated and he'll just talk mad shit when you're alone with him. Never do it, of course, sadly, in front of the cameras, but he is quite a character in person. I've really enjoyed my time speaking with him, and he certainly would get extra salty about that, Thorin.
By the way, before we move on from Worlds, one last thing we should ask about, because obviously EG was there. I wanted to know what you actually thought of how EG played, because even though it's going to look like lol, they were crap on it. They were like in all those games I was watching.
They were the best NA team.
The Gen.G games. There was like moments in these games that were looking good.
Yeah, I think like your strategy coming into this Worlds was very interesting. Like you were hilariously now in retrospect, your early Varus picks. Actually, I wasn't even thinking about this. Now in retrospect, your Varus picks are actually kind of prescient in a way, given the way that we saw the meta evolve from in the semis and the finals in particular, where Varus all of a sudden becomes the highest priority champion in the game. Now, part of this is because what's cool about Varus is you can either play the lethality poke build and you can play the on-hit tank buster attack speed build. So you have he's useful in many different kind of situations that you can pick him blind, and you can either deal with heavy frontline tanks or you can deal with squishy simply by poking them out. Very strong laning phase as well. Few answers to him, like kind of decent wave clear. But this is your early Varus comps, I thought were cool because you were using these pick comps and using kind of forcing a lot of early dragons and getting to 3 soul points. And then I'm like, come on, EG, kill JDG. You just got to get this one more dragon. And then you fuck up your setup and let them into the dragon. No, you have to poke them first. It really broke my heart because I thought your early game scripting was really quite entertaining, and your draft picks in the end, I think you guys really redeemed yourselves with the Varus. So let's start with that. Why did you guys have this priority on Varus before anybody else knew that this thing was good?
I mean, firstly, you've got to give credit to Rigby, right? Rigby is
for sure
has spent the entire year kind of smurfing and drafting in LCS. He was even drafting, putting us in positions to win at MSI as well. Obviously the situation with Varus is we knew it was strong for all of the reasons you've just said, but also it was pretty hard in the current meta to fit Engage into your comp, right? So this is one of the reasons why you saw Ashe being played. It's one of the reasons you saw Varus getting played.
Especially conditional Engage like Varus ult, where you don't have to commit.
Yeah, exactly. So this is I think that this is the main reason for Varus. Also, it was very good against Mad Lions because it's good into, depending on support matchup, you can pick it into Draven. It's good into Kalista in the right matchups. and in the right support matchup. Sorry, and yeah, no, I mean it's obviously a pick that Kaori is very, very comfortable playing. So yeah, it was good that it was meta. Fortunately, we weren't able to close any of the games out against the major teams, but it was definitely a good pick for sure.
And then when it came to your strategy, because you guys were very good throughout the year about having like clear game plans, and especially like it felt like you guys really scripted out the first 5 or 10 minutes of the games a lot of times. Was that the plan coming in here as well? How did you approach some of these like team compositions that you guys were using?
So what I would say is that the team compositions. So what I would say is that the difference between EG and LCS and EG and Worlds was, so a lot of our situations in LCS were situations where we would play with 4 people to one side of the map and Danny on the other, right? Playing, it's not like, it's playing to kind of cheat on weak side, right? It's like aggressively contesting opponent's strong side in a way that will force them to lose tempo in a trade side situation, right? That is the standard EG kind of style of play over the course of the year. And obviously this is something which takes a lot of time to build synergy. It's something that we didn't do that well actually at the start of spring. It's one of the reasons why EG were 9-9 in spring. And I think there wasn't quite enough time, because in those situations you need 2 things from your AD carry, right? Number 1, you need your AD carry to know when not to group and when to like kind of drop the center way, drop mid lane in order to go and push sides, especially around Herald situations. Because there's times where you're supposed to win, and there's times where you're supposed to miss. But also, it requires you to understand as a 4 what your limits are in a situation where you're contesting 4v5 on weak side. And I think that, you know, EG going into Worlds, we're playing a very different style of play where we were playing more group as 5. So I think we had to adapt a lot to that in draft. And, you know, again, going back to Varus, this is another, you know, Varus is a great group as 5 champion. And I think that's kind of something that was different from EG. Did we play it at 100%? No. Could we have, you know, done better with a bit more time? You know, maybe. But I think our group was really, really tough for sure. In terms of matchups as well for EG. I'm just disappointed with that. You know, we weren't able to get 2-0 over GT. That's what I would say about that.
What was your experience? Because like, were you scrimming DRX a lot?
Yes. A lot of things that Jojo was playing, like the more Korean mid laners Jojo plays against, the more respect he gets for LCK as a whole, I think. Because obviously he came in being he's the biggest trophy fan in the West, and you know many people will say, "Oh, I'm the biggest trophy fan," but this guy literally used to like live trophy. He would like watch trophy boards all the time. You know, he would do nothing except. And I think over the last 2 international tournaments, his education over different types of styles used by international mid laners has been really valuable. We scrim DRX a lot.
Is that where the set counter pick into Silas came in?
Yeah, that's something that
that's hilarious.
that actually worked really well in scrims. It's something that actually wait, was it us that played it first, or was it them that played it first? I don't know, but it became part of the internal scrim meta between the 2 teams.
Now I wish fuck man. Now I wish that Faker had pulled out the Silas in finals, and then the set counter pick would have come out. That would have been extremely entertaining.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if he picked it. I wonder if he would have picked it though with Worlds on the line, considering the inconsistency of some of his other teammates. But no, we swim them quite a lot. I would say we probably swim them more than any other team, because the problem is that play-ins, it was basically impossible for play-in teams this year, right? Because if you like EG flew out, so we played with Mexico City, we played our best of 5, flew out basically the next morning, had content the next day, and then like had, you know, half a day where we could swim something, and then had to go on stage. And I'm pretty sure it was the same for other playing teams. It was just impossible to get scrims because, you know, you have all of this content at international tournaments.
Fnatic said they had 2 different days where people cancelled for media days.
Yeah, exactly. It was like this, and oh yeah, of course, Fnatic were in planes too. It was really rough. Like this year, the scheduling for this year has been very, very odd. Like going into MSI, we came back from Houston. we had 24 hours, and then we're on a plane again. And the funny thing is that there were massive storms around Houston the night before, so many people's planes were cancelled. So I think like Danny and Jojo only had like 12 hours turnaround in LA. Like they arrived, went home, packed their bags, and then went straight to Korea. And you know, I understand that LCS had moved their schedule late into the season, but I've never seen things like this before. So it was definitely a very odd year. So
yeah, to put this in in perspective for those people who don't know the schedule as it's been in the past, usually there is more time between the end of play-ins and the start of groups. I don't know why it was like 2 or 3 days this time. Also, like very weird things such as the LEC took a week off after the regular season before starting playoffs, which then pushed their playoff schedule later as well, when they could have wrapped up sooner. The scheduling this year was quite strange for some reason when it came to the end of playoffs and the start of Worlds.
I would say though, for LEC, they've sometimes done that in the past. Like when Worlds was in EU, they added the.
I mean, that makes more sense because they're not moving.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. Obviously, I think when you had Yamato on the show, you kind of spoke about the disadvantage that Worlds being in NA had for Western teams. You know, we couldn't go to Eastern regions and scrim to get up to speed fast enough.
And then they waited as long as possible to come and all that. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, you know, at the end of the day, none of these things are excuses. Right? They are kind of, but it doesn't explain the result, right? It's just there were lots of tiny things that were just really, really odd this year. But I think that, you know, considering the circumstances, I'll take a 3-0 win against Mad Lions and a win against G2 to not go 0-8 against them.
Let me ask you a tricky question, Peter, because obviously you always go out of your way to try and stress that, like, the Rigby guy does the drafting and then all the different people who do everything. So here's the real question. What do you do? Because everyone else thinks you're just a head coach and you're the genius. You pick all the players and scout them and make all the... So what do you actually do? What is your, like, major role in EG and maybe Mad Lions as well? Give us the overview.
I mean, that's an interesting question. What does the head of coaching staff do, right? And I mean, if I'm honest, so there's 3 roles, right? The first thing is about development and scouting. So obviously, huge amount of say in that. Second thing is in terms of making sure that the coaches development parts are up to scratch, right? So a lot of one of the benefits of having a head of coaching staff is that they have an overview over the entire system, and you know, they provide mentorship and training for coaches, right? Like this is something which is very, very important within any kind of structure. You have to find ways to help your coaches improve. And then the third thing is assisting the strategic coach, or, you know, LCS head coach or LEC head coach, you know, whatever you want to call it, with their setup for the team. Okay. And the thing is that there's 2 ways that you can kind of play this kind of head coach role. The first is you give them space to act, and you give them advice, you come and fill in, you fill in prep, you do a lot of spot coaching, or you can kind of take a more hands-on approach, which is something that I don't actually like doing very much, where you basically say, okay, this is the way that things should be done, do it, and you will do things, and you will fit things in kind of this system. Now, let me think about how I want to phrase this. When I came to EG, I was not expecting necessarily to be filling a head of coaching staff role. I was expecting to be filling in an LCS head coach role. So it was very interesting that EG chose to promote me at the start of this year, from a role where you're working every day face to face with the players, to working with a role where you have like an additional layer between, right? And you know, from my career, although I'm happy to fill a head of coaching staff role, you know, the reason why I'm in this is because I enjoy helping people develop, right? Involve players develop, and you know, that is a decision that has to be made for the benefit of the team, and obviously it kind of paid off for EG, but for me, hopefully other things will develop on into the future. But definitely, you know, definitely this is filling this kind of role was very, very odd this year. And if you really want to ask me what I was doing with the LCS team, it was a case of doing individual spot coaching, mainly with Jojo, but sometimes with Danny, sometimes with others, and it was a lot of scouting. So that's what I was doing with the LCS team, basically acting as another scouting analyst, and then of course doing a lot of work with academy, doing a lot of work with amateur, and doing lots of work working with other coaches within the team. I'd say that's a different role from Mad Lions. On Mad Lions, I was basically just integrated directly as part of the coaching staff, and maybe I was Max. You could say I was Max assistant coach doing other coaching responsibilities as well. So it was a very different role, for sure.
And when it comes to putting together this roster, you might, like EG might lose Impact at the end of this year. His contract is expiring on the 22nd of November, but basically everyone else is locked up until the end of 2024, with the exception of Kaori, who obviously you didn't have an intention of playing onto this roster. And we're not going to obviously get into the Danny shit, because like that's,
I mean, he also just said he has an NDA, can't talk about it anyway, so there's nothing he could say.
But what was, I want to talk about what it was like suddenly bringing Kaori in and how you got him up to speed, especially at Worlds, because he was an ADC that looked more appropriate to the meta, at least in playoffs, even though he didn't have synergy and was not even on the same continent when you guys called him up. But by the time Worlds got around, he also, I think, really he had a good performance on an individual level overall. And I think it was surprising to see that he would be able to handle the pressure of these scenarios that you kind of had to thrust him into, and then perform pretty well as a whole. Were you happy with Kaori's performance? And like, how did you get him into this roster that I know you very deliberately built around Danny, which can be hard for another player to take that spot?
So I think it was a hard fit for Kaori. Kaori is somebody who has a very strong laning phase. I mean, I think even by international standards, him and Vulcan showed, they got lots of 2v2 kills even in group stages against some of the strongest bot lanes. Some very strong bot lanes. I wouldn't say the strongest 2v2 bot lanes in the tournament in our group, but I think Kaori adapted as best as he possibly could, but he was put into a very, very difficult situation. What I would say, maybe to go a little bit towards the Danny stuff. So what Thorin says is very fair. The story around Danny is, and this is a very, very basic story that you can come and tell, which is that there was an amount of pressure that Danny was under, and at some point Danny decided that he couldn't fulfill that requirement, and then it's a very easy narrative to go and say, oh, this player didn't have enough, didn't have it in him, or this is a player this is a player that or maybe coaches didn't care enough about him, and he was put in a very, very difficult situation. But the key thing is that he couldn't cut it, right? And discussing Danny in those terms is, I think, how people have discussed the narrative around Danny at the end of the year. And I think that this is basically the only kind of way, the only narrative that we have around it, right? It's very clear that he stepped down once EG were qualified for Worlds, but I think that there's another way that something like this could be framed in theory. So I'm not saying that this happened. I'm saying that there's two reasons why players may choose to stand down in a situation like Danny chose to stand down, right? Number one is they can't handle the pressure and they move on, right? Number two, the number two situation you could have is that a player is very, very near to their limit. They push themselves extremely hard.
Yep.
Push themselves maybe past what they should push themselves in order to be a part of their team. And at some point, they reach a point where they cannot push themselves any further, but it's not down to not being able to cut it. It's just that there is a push that a player like this is pushing themselves, what they want and then stand down because they think it's better for their teammates, right? And those two things are very different, right? Because in the one case, it's very easy to come and say to a player, okay, this is a player that couldn't cut it, right? In the second situation, there's a very interesting discussion to be had, which is, if a young 18-year-old player is pushing themselves at this kind of a limit and pushing themselves to this kind of a level, and why is this player being allowed to push themselves to this level for such a long, sustained period of time? And what I would say on this is, what I would say about Danny is a player. It's very sad to see the narrative around Danny, because what I would say about Danny is when Danny came up, and one of the reasons he went straight from amateur to LCS is that he was a player, like Danny literally doesn't care about glory. He doesn't care about being the most recognized person. There's VODs of the games when he was playing at the LCS finals, where the crowd is cheering Danny because it's the 100 Thieves series after he just got the pen to the previous day.
Right. Yeah.
And what's the first thing he's saying to his teammates? He's saying, "Why are they cheering for me? Like, I didn't do anything." And this is the thing that I would say about Danny, is that Danny was always a player that put other people before himself, and the reason he was in the game was to test himself to see how far he could go as an individual. Okay, so which of those two narratives you choose to go along, right, with is, he couldn't cut it and he was, he just put his teammates in a really bad position, or he recognized that his teammates needed him to play at a really high level so that he could go to Worlds. He pushed himself to that point where he could get his teammates to Worlds. And then after he'd done that, after he fulfilled his obligations, step back. Those are two very, very different narratives and things that maybe can be thought about, right? Because I think there's the discussion around this point is it lacks kind of a lot of nuance, and I think it's very easy to just put a lot of things just on that. Okay, so
a point you made there that's very interesting. Yeah, go on, Monty.
Hold on just a second, Peter. You've got some squeaking in the background. I think it's one of the fans. If you wouldn't mind turning it up. Yeah, it's all very interesting. I just want to make sure that we don't have like the squeaking going. So thank you. Okay, sorry, Thorin. Continue.
Right. The point that he's sort of illustrating there in an abstract sense, we can't speak about whether it's specifically the case here, is basically, I'll put it a different way because I don't think you hit the first part hard enough. You made the second part clear. Think about the difference of this, guys. It's not as simple as someone was totally fine. Their life was normal. They were a normal pro player. And then one day they woke up and they were like, I can't ever play League of Legends ever again. And then it was just like, what the hell? You quit on us? Like, you left? Like, wow, where was this coming from? We couldn't possibly have predicted. What if the other scenario was the person gradually got into this situation of whatever trouble they were in? And in this scenario, maybe actually the moment when they could have felt like, actually, I maybe want to quit now, is like, oh, but the problem is like, we have to play the playoffs maybe, or maybe we've got the lower bracket run to do. We've got to beat all these teams. So instead you go, you know what? I'll just find a way mentally to get the next season. Wow, we've won this one. I'll find another way to get the next one. Wow. Right, we got to Worlds right now. Sorry, now I have to take a break. Like, this is too much now. Look, we got the team to Worlds. Someone else can go in my place. Like, that would be a point Peter's making abstractly is, wouldn't that make you think of that person in a different sense? You actually wouldn't say, what a loser. I guess they can't cut it. Like, get the fuck out. This is for champions only. What you'd actually say is like, wow, what a fucking heroic effort. Even if in the end you were like Moses and you couldn't go to the promised land with the rest of the team, as it were.
Yeah, I think it's also, a lot of people who are criticizing this have never really felt the kind of pressure that exists to be a professional player, because you have to maintain a level that is, elite among the elites. It's really, really difficult to do that. And the amount of dedication and training that you have to go through is very challenging. And even if you have the talent to do it, not everybody can do, even the talented ones may not be able to do it at that level for a super extended period of time. And it's a rare quality. This is why we celebrate players like Faker, who somehow continue to be relevant 10 years deep into their career. It is an enormous sacrifice to play at this level for such a long period of time, because unlike physical sports, there aren't limitations to how much video games you can play, which means that the training process is often even more grueling in terms of your time.
There aren't physical ones. That's the joke, isn't it? There are, clearly there are mental limits to how much you can play. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of course.
But by the way, I'd even say this is an angle people miss. Despite what people might tell you on Twitter, I have never criticized Danny for not playing at this point in time. I was very clear about who I was criticizing. Spoiler, one of the people's in this call, it was people who framed it a certain way. And if they themselves, I didn't do this, Peter, if they themselves contrasted Danny or Jojo, in this case, with other super veteran players, I think I had a very apt point to make, which is typically those veteran players are proven in those scenarios and they're just unlikely to have the same scenarios. So anyway, that's by the by. I'm not bringing that up for Peter now. But the point I would make is this. It's why if you ever notice, I've got a track record that goes way back on this. I never spin it as like, you should play if you feel terrible or you had some tragedy in your life, some family passing, illness or something. I go the other way. Actually, my expectation is the majority of people will not be able to play in those scenarios and understandably will have to step aside or take time off or undergo somewhat of rehab. If you are the extremely rare person Monty's talking about, the 1 in a million guy who somehow can get through it, somehow can battle personal tragedy. So if you're double lift, where everyone knows what happened to his mom dying right before the LCS finals, but he chose to play anyway, and he won. In Counter-Strike, we had a great example where Dupree's dad died something like 3 days before a major. He not only won the major, he had some of his best career stats ever. And then the third one a lot of people do not know is Rafa, the Quake player, actually during all the lockdown era had a scenario where I think it was his girlfriend or his fiance just died like very shortly before the World Championship of Quake, and he just won the World Championship of Quake and did it as like a tribute or whatever. Those are extremely, all those people I've just listed there will be in Hall of Fame one day as some of the greatest, like just humans to ever play esports, never mind like just players and esports. That is very rare, and you should absolutely not expect that to be a standard. That's why, as Monty says, if you are that sort of person, we'll give you even more praise. We'll sort of be like, dude, that's like something out of a movie. I can't believe you did that.
Yeah. And look, there's a lot of people who, there's a lot of conversation about mental health these days, which I think is a good conversation to have. But just to be clear to everybody, there is nothing mentally healthy about playing this many video games or sports. Like we're not talking about people who are normal individuals. Like you have to have a psychotic dedication to competition to reach this level, whether it's a sports or esports. And these people are just built differently. And there isn't a universe where you can say, well, these people need to have like a healthy, balanced life, or, the stress of this situation is immense, and it often drives these people to new heights. It's not for the faint of heart, and there is nothing that anyone's ever going to be able to do to make this level of competition less intense. That's just
you cannot know. Here's the other thing: you cannot know before if someone's going to make it. It's very much sink or swim. You're thrown in the deep end, and you make it or you don't. Come on, Peter.
I would agree with that. The only further point I would add to this is obviously it's worth saying that when double lift obviously is very admirable for what he chose to do, but he was a multi-year veteran at that point, right? And there's a difference between double lift at that point and Danny at this point, and that is, this is normally a skill set that you would normally pick up over time and you will learn over time, right? To pace yourself.
All the people I listed are mega veterans, by the way.
And it's very easy for people to just sit there, not say anything, while somebody like Danny would take criticism in a situation like this, instead of maybe asking a question. Is there something that could have been done to look after Danny? And where would that kind of responsibility fall?
I mean, it's obviously a tough situation. I have to ask.
By the way, don't get too triggered about the fan. Just imagine that we're on like a bike ride on a penny farthing next to Peter Dunn.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if it's the fans or is it?
It could be some chimes outside or something.
It's literally birds. It's literally, I can't stress.
Oh, it's birds.
Oh,
okay, we did it. Can you go kill them real quick? All right, guys. Well, there's nothing we can do about the birds.
No, something we do.
You got to deal with it. Yeah. Fucking birds.
I'll say is this: it's quite an apt analogy, isn't it? A lot of you guys are tapping out 1 second into something mildly annoying going on in the background. Like, imagine being a pro player and having all those fucking voices inside your head all the time. Pressures, expectations. That's like 50 of those sounds exactly. exactly. You guys wanted to tap out
the sound of the tweets in their ears as they have to read all the garbage.
Yeah, basically, Peter's just getting my like Twitter experience from like a year ago, whatever.
But yeah, I that's another underappreciated aspect of this is at least professional athletes have kind of a degree of separation oftentimes. But the expectation in esports is that you are streaming, that you are tweeting, that you are on social media in direct access to fans, and those fans can often be quite cruel. And so it adds even another layer of stress for being involved in esports.
I think that this is also, though, something which maybe is very hard for people from other regions to kind of understand about North America, which is that sometimes the fan base in North America, I'm really sorry about these birds. I really
it's
can't
great. I'm loving it. All right, continue.
I'm so sorry. But like, it's literally just a nest of birds. I really can't do anything to them.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. We'll just continue.
But you know, this is something maybe if we have a wider discussion about North America, which is worth saying, right? Which is that I think that the amount of criticism that comes towards players and the toxicity and the negativity around North America is unlike any region in the entire world. And some of that is deserved, right? But I mean, maybe to give an example, obviously there's all of the, like, you know, I've never, before coming to North America, I never got so many people telling me to like kill myself or things like this in Twitter DMs.
In just random fans.
Why do you have your DMs open, you psycho?
Because I want to interact. I want people to be able to interact with me. It's really weird.
Oh my god!
Still on that naive train, Monty, of like, yeah, but what about the legit people? It's like, mate, the impact of the bad ones counterbalances that.
I mean, there was a point where
Peter Dunn's committed to ruining his own mental health. I set up a fortification, you know.
I really considered it the Worlds because there was a guy who just clipped me out of context to like some honest reply to some message that. Anyway, it's tough. I've always tried to do it. I'm going to keep trying to do it. I may regret it at one point in the future, but for now it's okay. But maybe I can give another example, like a Danny example, right? Which is the second week that Danny joined the LCS team. I had an anonymous Twitter DM messaging me saying that Danny was boosting accounts whilst playing for EG. Okay, and this guy, he had tons of screenshots. He said, you know, this had been confirmed by multiple people, and I looked at, and, you know, who knows how many other people he done this. And, you know, he said he knew it was Danny. It was definitely Danny. You know, everyone within some kind of community knew it was Danny. And we were scrimming at the time that those boosting games happened. and I mean, like, to give you an idea of what some of these guys go through, some of these kids go through, it's completely absurd, right? In Europe, the one thing that in Europe is that, you know, I don't get on with everybody in Europe. I don't get on with everyone in the European scene. But whenever you hear a rumor about yourself in Europe, you can kind of see, okay, yeah, I kind of did do that, but, you know, he's kind of spinning it in a bad way. He's kind of mean, right? You know, this rumor is kind of mean. But I can kind of understand how, if you had a completely different point of view to me, you might see things like that, right? But in North America, people just make up stuff. Like, it's the most crazy thing. I don't understand it. They just make up stuff about pro players, about what a pro player did on this time, about, you know, and I don't know if it's clout chasing. I don't know if it's just, you know, just something that's acceptable to do in North America that maybe isn't as acceptable to do in Europe. But the amount of shit that these guys have to go through in this region is absolutely crazy. And, you know, there's whole discords dedicated in North America to just making stuff up about people. I don't know. It's very, very, very odd. So I think that the amount of wear and tear that you get over the course of a year as a pro in North America is also higher than in Europe. You know, I can't talk about Korea, obviously, right? Korea is another level. But you know, it's definitely different, and that's something that I've learned, and it's something, you know, even people are talking about these days. You know, Chaui talking about the TSM subreddit. You know, every single time that they lose a game, people are tagging him, flaming him, like hard, going really, really hard in kind of an unacceptable way. And this is something which is very common in North America. Sorry,
I mean, Chaui recently came out too and said that even like the TSM Discord was like hard flaming, like tagging him and hard flaming him. And just outrageous that would be the case. Like, I just don't understand why TSM just doesn't ban these people instantly, or like, why does the coach have to be inside the fucking Discord? Like,
I know what you mean, Monty.
What's going on there? You know,
but the problem is, remember, it's TSM. Like, you can't just ban the entire fan base, can you? Like, if you've never been on the TSM sub, like, I know Dom's done this a million times now. I used to rush to the TSM sub when they would lose like LCS finals or something, mate, because it is the most amazing. Like, it's like you just go through the looking glass, because the same people who before the final are like, wow, TSM's the best, they're gonna win, I love every player, they're all the best at their position. Afterwards, it's like they just like want everyone fired. Like, basically everyone except Björk is like, fire this guy, the coaching staff, Reginald himself. Like, they just turn so hard on you. It's crazy. It's fucking crazy, mate.
No, I do. I mean, I think there are similar fan bases to that in Europe. Like, Fnatic's fan base is also kind of crazy at times, and can go in on their staff and have these.
I've even seen it from the G2 ones, dude. Like, the G2 ones got for a while to be the Cloud9 ones, where it's like, whatever. Like, they're obnoxious in the sense that Carlos is obnoxious, but generally because they were just so used to winning, they were pretty chill fan base. But just look at the splits they didn't win, mate, and then look at when they looked like they were in trouble. They also turned dark. By the way, one thing I would like to ask Peter about is this. Can you give us some thoughts on because remember, Peter, if you don't know, has also coached in Brazil. He's coached in all the different regions in the world. I would ask this. The very easy narrative that always gets discussed between people who've been in LCS and LEC is this notion that, like, LEC is a bit more combative when the players are figuring out problems and stuff, whereas NA is more like the coaching staff has to be like very careful and certain conversations can't happen. Right, here's the problem I have with that topic, mate, is it makes LEC in Europe sound too cool. Like, understand, guys, they're still fucking nerds, and the majority of those guys might type something naughty in the game. They're not up in people's faces. No one's having like fist fights in these rooms. They're still nerds. To me, I think the whole emphasis for me is more like the NA side. It just sounds like people don't ever want like to sort of be called out, if you know what I mean. What would you say to this topic, Pete? It's a pretty common trend that comes up in these conversations.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly correct, right? Like, I think that it's almost like losing face, right? Like, it's there's less willingness to lose face in North America, and I think that this is something that makes Jojo a bit of a psychopath in this as a rookie, because he's really, really up for criticism, and maybe if you're not criticizing him enough, he doesn't feel that he's getting better. But I've definitely heard some stories where players will allow review in North America to get personal, and this happens much more in North American teams than it does in European teams. Also, there's one other thing which I would say is that there's much more back talking in North America, which is another interesting thing. Like, one thing I appreciate about EU, maybe I've just been on good EU teams, although I was on 3 different rosters of Splice and Mad Lions, which is that there's an understanding that you guys have to have each other's back. In North America, you hear all the time, like, okay, so there's an LS situation, right? And I'm not going to leak anything about more than has what been said. But what I would say is that I heard about what had happened from 4 different people within 24 hours after he was fired. About what had happened, all kinds of different perspectives, all kinds of different views. Obviously, I'm not going to say I trust one more than the other, and I'm not going to go into more than this. But there's no concept of like privacy within your team, and having each other's
in the locker room.
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact thing. Like, locker room, there is locker room responsibility and accountability in Europe, right? And this is something you always hear. This person said that. This person said that. This person said. You hear all of these stories all the time. And look, yes. Let's be clear. I'm a 35-year-old coach. Okay, I don't go to the parties with my players. I don't. I don't.
I mean, that's a bad idea.
yeah. But I mean, like, I don't interact with them in social. I don't have friends who are within the scene, right? Like, I mean, okay, who are players within the scene, right? And yet, even somebody like me, who's this detached socially from other people within the community, still hears all of this stuff, right? So what are people that have more connections than me hearing, right? Sure. And this kind of thing destroys teams. And I can count at least 4 teams in the past like 3 or 4 years that have been destroyed by this kind of thing. And Yeah, and that.
Well, you know what's wild about it too is that you really it's rare to hear about this kind of stuff in professional sports because the players don't leak it. I mean, even in very large locker rooms in the NFL, you almost never hear anything. Like,
mate, I don't know if you know this,
53
Monty.
players on those teams, and you don't really know what's going on in there.
Did you see this recent incident, Monty, where Draymond Green punched a player who was a teammate of his on the Warriors in the face in a practice, right? There's a reason why all the sports coverage, the main thing all the pro players were saying was, how did this get out the locker room? They weren't even commenting initially on the punch and was it wrong? And should he do it? Their whole thing was like, this should never get out the locker room. Nobody even this has happened, you know. Who like they were like, who took that video? Who released it? Like, that's a big deal. I agree with you. Like, that's like super verboten. That's like considered really, like, that's like a fireable offense essentially if you're the leak and you get caught as the leak. Whereas, as he's saying here, the amount of rumors in NA is ridiculous, mate. What else were you going to say, Monty?
I mean, no, I heard about all the LS stuff too. While it was happening, and it's ridiculous. I think I agree with Peter. It is just
I'll give you the European equivalent. Here's how you know that this doesn't happen. And by the way, this is why when I've told all those stories in past years about Reckless and who we might not like and which teammates don't like, that's because I actually have all the players. I had all the connections and that stuff. Those were not in the scene. Those were not things behind the scenes that were very well known. Like, the best example ever, in my opinion, that this doesn't happen in LEC very much is, what did everyone hear that ever leaked out to the public about the Fnatic team? By the way, there's no way that was a great team. I have friends in that team. There's no way they were having an awesome time. But by the end of the year, because it didn't leak out and it didn't allow people to like figure out who doesn't like who and where's the problem exactly and who actually thinks someone should get caught, because none of that leaked outside of the team, they were even able to get it together, do the playoff run, go to Worlds and even actually have some good results. And now we're hearing all these rumors. Maybe now Razork stays. Like, if all that had leaked out, I agree with what Peter says. That is so pernicious, because the worst thing is this, not only when it gets to other people, so then they can start interfering and figuring out, oh, maybe I can get in on that team, or this guy, kick that guy out. Even worse, it's when it gets back to the player again through the grapevine, that's when it kills you. Because when it comes back to him, it's like in Counter-Strike, we have this all the time, by the way. In Counter-Strike, even though your teammates won't tell you they're going to cut you after the next tournament, you heard it. And it's in the back of your head when you go to play that game. And by the way, half the time it makes the player who's going to get cut play worse. Because even worse, they're thinking, oh, bloody hell's my whole job. Like, I agree with you. That kind of like pernicious gossip destroys teams.
Yeah, and it's often not the players who are spreading it, right? It's other people, right? People who have a connection to somebody, who want to show that they have a connection.
Yes.
People who want, and somebody who overheard something that then they go and make sure that they tell every single other person. And this is something which is very, very North America, and it leads to a lot of automatic situations where you have a lot of distrust that builds up very, very quickly, right? And so I think that's one thing. Yeah, I mean, don't really. So what are we talking about? We're talking about differences between NA and EU,
yeah.
Right?
Were there any other key ones you'd hit on?
Yeah, so obviously there's the scrim. I think the scrim things have been talked about many, many, many times. The review time in North America is really, really rough. I think there's another interesting one, which is maybe talking about fan response, right? Incentive structures. Let's talk a bit about incentive structures, which I think is interesting in North America. Okay, so people think NA pros are lazy, right? Like, that's the public perception. It's not. I don't believe it's that true. I mean, you look at Beryl playing 0 games of solo queue, or barely more than the very basic, and yet he's a world champion. And it's joking about how he played more Genshin Impact than League of Legends during the World Championship. I think that people sometimes idealize how much Eastern players grind. Sure, there are grinders. Sure, there are much more grinders in China and Korea than they are in North America. But it's not like there are no grinders in North America, and it's not like every single player in every single Eastern team is a massive grinder, right? Like, another example, the Shy, famous perma ARAM, player. He loves his ARAMs. Doesn't really play too much. But let's talk about incentive structure. So let's say you have I'm really sorry about these, but let's say that you have let's say that you
quiet. It's okay. It's okay.
So let's say you have an incentive structure for. Okay, so the question is, if these pros are lazy, why aren't there other people coming up and taking their spots, right? If they're not improving, and what can a region do to promote this, right? And NA obviously has a lower player base, right? So this means that there is less pressure on people at the top to perform better, because you don't need to perform better than in China, you have 18 people maybe contesting you for your spot. In NA, maybe you have 1, maybe 2. You just.
Here's the example. If you are Zoom in China, you can be replaced, and the guy who replaces you might actually be good enough. He just takes your job full time. In NA, if you bench like a star level player, you probably are gonna have to bring him back in a month anyway. Like you're not permanently replacing him in most cases, right?
But the problem is that the systems that NA has in place for promoting young players basically are very, very limited, right? And this is maybe a reason to be optimistic about North America. You can be very pessimistic about it, but there are good things in the region, right? Things like Champions Queue, things like Proving Wells Tournament. But the narrative in North America around Champions Queue is Fudge doesn't play it. Like other top pros don't play it. This is a disaster. This just shows how lazy everyone in the region is. But actually, what people should be looking at instead is, who are these guys who are playing it? Because your region, the pressure, it's not fan pressure downwards on players that forces them to work harder, right? It's because often a lot of things are forgiven, right? You win the title, and everyone forgets everything, all the criticism that's been laid on your back over time. It comes in waves, and people learn to expect that as the news cycle progresses. But the question is, who should be challenging the top players more? It's the teams that are ranked 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And this is something which I kind of noticed this year more than anything, when EG worked harder than any single other team in spring. Like there's no team that came close to the amount of grinding that people in EG did. It's just not possible. Jojo literally, for instance, would turn on Champions Queue at 6 p.m. and he would be literally the last person to leave the queue for like multiple months, right? But the thing is that when EG won the title, we're now the top team. Who should be coming and challenging us, right? It should be the TLs. It should be the Cloud9s. It should be the 100 Thieves. They should be they should be the teams that are putting in the extra work to come and take over that spot, to come and challenge those spots, right? And what I would say is that in North America, let me rephrase it. Let me think very carefully about this. The 2 teams that worked the hardest in Summer Split in North America were CLG and TL. By like a significant margin. And that raises interesting questions, right? Which is that, why aren't other teams putting in that effort? And the thing is that if you're in Europe, and let's say, so I'm not saying Fnatic were like this, okay? But let's say you're on a Mad Lions, right? And Fnatic, you scrim Fnatic, G2, Rogue, Misfits every single week, right? And like 2 or 3 weeks, Fnatic troll your scrims. You just stop scrimming to Fnatic. You go find like an ERL team, right? Or like a top ERL team. They're not that bad, right? They're maybe, or you scrim like a lower level LEC team, and your practice isn't that effective. In North America, you stop scrimming, let's say 100 Thieves, who you're practicing against. You have literally nobody to practice against. So you have to tolerate a lot more in North America than you would in maybe other regions. And
what does that translate to? Like, are we talking just when people troll scrims? Does that mean people can just not turn up to scrims or reschedule last minute? How far does it go?
Be 30 minutes late. Be take 60 minutes in every review when you've agreed to 15-minute reviews. And to be clear, just because I use 100 Thieves as an example, I don't necessarily mean that.
It's just a placeholder show.
Yes.
Just as a hypothetical thing. But things like obviously blatantly running it down, right? Like, I mean, as a coach or a player, if somebody on the other team is running it down and just wants to get 5 scrims over. And this is the other crazy thing about North America, is that even if you have 5 useless scrims that and you're finished by 3:30, that's it. There's no more scrims after 3:30. You've just played 5 scrims. Oh, great. All the scrims are done. You go home. And like, this was also something crazy, because
how does that differ to LEC, to put this in comparison?
So normally you would pressure the team to play to play 6 or 7, and sometimes you would have like maybe a team like G2 in 2019 is so good that you have literally zero leverage over them, right? That they can do whatever they want in scrims, and they normally beat you, so it didn't matter. Like that G2 team was incredible in scrims, but if you aren't getting enough practice, or you think that like other teams have bad scrim habits in EU, you can just scrim the top ERL teams. And like the top ERL teams, they won't be insane. You can't scrim them every single day of the week, right? But you will get good practice out of them, and you have an escape. You have an escape valve, right? Like you can blacklist teams very, very easily in EU. But short of like scrimming PL 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes it can be very, very hard to ensure that your scrim quality is of a very, very high level, right? That's what I would say. The other thing is obviously review time. The other thing is a lot of people wasting time. Now, I'm not saying every EU team is an angel, right? Like this definitely happens in EU as well. That you get scrims finishing much earlier. But I would say that this is something which in North America is pervasive, and your outs are they don't exist, right? That's what I would say about that.
So as a coach, what prevents teams from playing 6 or 7 games? Because at least in my experience of watching like C9 scrims, over the last couple of years, C9 would like frequently play like 6 games or something like that. So what is the barrier for you as a coach to like saying, oh, well, why don't you just say instead of a best of 5, like we're playing until 5 p.m. and that's how it's going to go. And if instead of ending at 3:30, if there's still time, why don't we just agree to play more?
Yeah, I mean, as a coach, you ask the other coach and you say, I would like to play against 5 until 5. And some teams, Cloud9, good example, TL, and another good example, you just play more scrims. Some teams you scrim against, and it's like, oh, my player says that he's very tired and he didn't sleep so well last night, and so we can't use our academy guy, so you're going to have to go, and we're going to have to cancel. I'm really, really sorry, right? And the problem is you can't even scrim academy teams in North America because they play during the week. So you can't even scrim an academy team. So your options are, you're down to like amateur teams, and sometimes even the amateur teams play during the week. So there's literally no option, right? So blacklisting a team, and I'm going to say it is something that comes with a very, very strict cost in North America, and there's no really good solution to it. You just have to hope that other teams have better scrim habits and come up, right? So kind of the incentive structures also kind of mess up, and scrim. I think scrim practice is also an issue. The only other thing that I would think off the top of my head, how can I say this without making it blatant that I'm talking about TSM? No, let's say no. Okay, so I'm talking about an average team that is definitely not TSM or any other team that sounds like TSM. But let's have a hypothetical situation where in EU, a lot of the people who are in senior management positions within teams are people that have been in the industry for a long time, right? You earn your way up into positions. So this is how you know it's not TSM, right? You earn your way up into senior positions by kind of working through the system. A lot of the GMs are people that have been around for a long time. A lot of senior management. Sometimes you have players owning teams. Even people like Ibai, if they own a team, they've been around the scene for a long time, and they understand fundamentals of kind of how the game works. Now in North America, there's always this narrative in North America that it's just one tiny little thing that you can fix. And if you fix this one tiny thing, everything is solved, right? Now, if somebody in a senior management position, again, not in TSM, makes a decision that they want something done or they want to fix something, you as in Europe, that advice is normally, because of who it's coming from, is normally pretty good advice, right? That you should properly consider. If you are in North America, often there's a lot of people who are from outside esports who are recommending things which, without fully understanding the context. In the same way that fans, we go on Reddit every year after North America does badly at Worlds and say, here's the solution. If only people would do this one thing, everything would be fixed, right? Now, as a coach, you have 2 options, right? Either you do the suboptimal thing and it causes problems within your team, or you don't do the suboptimal thing, right? Now, let's say you don't do the suboptimal thing. At some point in the season, you will lose, right? You're going to go to Worlds, or you're going to go to MSI, and or you're going to go to playoffs, or you're not going to. You'll make playoffs, right? Right, because it's North America. But at some point, the person who has to assess if that thing that they wanted to do was done well is going to come to you and say, why did you not do the thing, right? Like, sure, we may have been successful, but if you'd done this thing, it would have been more successful, right? Or if you execute it, it leads to inefficiencies and it causes things to go badly. Why didn't you execute it properly, right? And I think that this is something from speaking to a lot of people within the entire scene. The amount of managerial interference in North American teams, roster building, all kinds of things in North America is much, much higher than in kind of any other region in Europe. And it's very hard to fight against that kind of intrusion as a coach, right? Maybe you have an idea, maybe you have
I've heard it's basically even like systematic, Peter. Like people actually, I would just describe it as it's like how a corporation runs. You've got like your middle manager guy, like, right, I'm setting quotas now, guys. Like, let's do the performance review for this bit. Whereas I've heard in Europe, it's more like if you set a good roster, it's like you wait until things are fucking like the house is burning down before you come running in. Like, what's going on in here? Like, it's like you leave it to the coaching staff, right?
In Europe, like, basically, I would say this as a coach. In Europe, it's very, very easy to understand my job. You have a meeting with your general manager or your owner or whoever at the start of the year, and you get told, these are the resources you have. This is the objective. Meet this objective, and you get to stay another year. Don't meet this objective, and you're going to be fired, right? Like, I mean, it's not said in those words, but it's very obvious what the meaning is when you're sitting in a meeting like this, right? It's not enough in North America to just win. You have to win in a certain way or with a certain roster or with, it's like you're handicapped, right? Like, because when you're trying to come and fix things. The other thing I would say in North America is obviously because the lower systems are very, very underdeveloped. The way that you develop as a coach, and this is something that Europe is a really good breeding ground for coaches, right? Is you have the opportunity in Europe as a coach, you go to the ERLs, right? You work your way up. You work in the Greek ERL or the Portuguese ERL, right? You do really well, great. You go to the Spanish, you go to the German first, or you go to the NLC, and then Spanish and French, right? Are the top ERLs, and then you go and make your way up to LEC, and you have opportunities to learn on the job. You have opportunities to make mistakes. You have opportunities to just get experience, right? Competing and to learn, right? In North America, you don't have this option, right? The under system is very, very underdeveloped. And basically, there has been a system in North America where only 20 people get a coaching job, essentially, right? Okay, maybe 30, you can have an assistant coach. I get because there were 10 academy teams where you could get paid, and then there were 10 LCS teams, and that was it, right? You may have one opportunity at an academy team, and if you don't succeed in 1 year, you're done. Your career's done, right? And that means that encourages a type of thinking which is very, very risk adverse, because your opportunities for improvement are limited, right? So this means that people don't have the opportunity to experiment. They don't have the opportunity to limit test, kind of in their approaches. And also, because of the lack of interaction between North America and other regions, the spread of new ideas in North America is pretty bad, right? Now, I think there was one thing I mentioned the last time I was on a show, I think with you, Thorin, which is that when I was interviewing for coaches in 2020, so going into 2021,
I remember this.
I interviewed 38 candidates, including many people who'd gone to Worlds, multiple playoff people, and 37 of those people, if they were coaching a European team, would have been laughed out of the room. If it was G2, you get 2 days. If it's like a team, Rookies of Mad Lions, you get maybe 2 weeks. And the level, the understanding in the scene, in the coaching scene, is so low. But the problem is that there's no opportunity for improvement. Like, there's literally no way that somebody can come up with their own ideas. So you often get people just duplicating what other people have said, right? And look, there's no problem with you coming to me as an aspiring coach and saying, I really, really like this idea that LS has had. But what I'm going to say in the interview is I want you to explain this to the same level that LS does in his video to his viewers. So I understand that you understand this point and you're not just saying it because somebody else is saying it. And there's the amount of people who just copy other people's ideas and try to fake their way through is crazy. number one. Second thing is that often to get an appointment on a team in North America, you just have to be friends with the player, right? Like sometimes players can come to orgs and say, I will not sign for your org unless this guy who I'm friends with is an assistant coach on the team. Right? Like
you also told another story on the other side of getting hired as a coach, which I found very telling, where you said that you went to all these different orgs to like interview of like, I could join your team, and that's only something like, wasn't it like 2 teams or something actually even asked you anything about the game League of Legends, asked you like a scenario or what you might do. Everything else was almost just like, I mean, it sounds like fluff or like the stuff that goes around being a coach, right?
Exactly. There were 6 teams that. So to be clear, I'm not an ex-pro player, right? Like, so I'm the type of player you should not trust to have good game knowledge, right? Like, I don't do that much educational content like somebody like Vega V2. Like, you should not trust me to run your team without checking my game knowledge. You know, maybe if I was Bjergsen or somebody, you don't need to test my game knowledge, right? Like, you know, he's been around for a long time. You just trust that as a pro he will have picked it up. But yeah, like I interviewed with 6 North American teams, and EG were the 2 teams questioned me on in-game knowledge, but EG were the only ones that like treated me as if, you know, I was. This sounds really bad. Treated me as if I was scum, right? Like, and I don't mean that EG treated me like I was scum, right? But what I mean is that, like, in the interview, every single thing which I said that was even mildly controversial, bang. Like, you know, I'd be questioned on it. I'm being like, you know, I feel that I'm being attacked. I feel that like people.
It made you prove yourself, right, and show that you knew what you're talking about.
And that doesn't make me feel insulted, right? That's like, holy shit, these guys actually give a shit. They have a good. I see Empire's in your chat. Yeah, I mean, Empire gave me one of the most brutal interviews I've ever had in like 10 years in esports. Like, I mean, his interview was really, really rough. He was like, why do Mad Lions do this thing? Why did you do it? Why did you not correct this thing? It was I love that interview. It's one of my favorite interviews that I've ever got to do.
But I mean, I think it proved itself, because I think we've praised the EG coaching staff many times on this show, because you guys clearly had a strong rookie development plan. You clearly had very distinct play styles that you were going towards in order to, as we've discussed, alleviate pressure on some of these rookies or introduce them to the professional scene, kind of highlight their upside while limiting their downside, and then slowly over time broaden their skill set as players and figure out ways to contribute, like prop up their, like basically hide their weaknesses at first while you are working on them. And I think it was, and obviously Rigby, we mentioned as a draft coach, has been very good. It looks, as I said, I hadn't even thought about this coming into the show, but it looks even better now given the meta that we saw in the finals. You know, we ended the finals, and then, you know, I flew home yesterday and had to deal with some other stuff, so I wasn't really thinking about that again until today. I was like, holy shit, actually, it looks even better in retrospect for Evil Geniuses. So I think people do have a lot of respect for your coaching staff, and probably it was this system that, you know, these kind of systems that allowed you to be successful. But I wanted to ask, like, why do you think there are so many of these kind of what you would consider underqualified coaches? Is it because there isn't like a kind of step-by-step ERL system to get these people's game knowledge up, or what would you say the reasoning is?
There's no way to get noticed. Like you know, often. So let's start from this. So if you're not being interviewed in a coaching interview about your in-game knowledge, how are you getting the job, right? Like, I really question what some of these other LCS teams were doing. How are they recruiting people, right? How are they recruiting coaches to coach their team if they're not testing them on in-game knowledge? It's just bizarre to me, right? So maybe you're very good at presenting yourself, so you get yourself an academy job, right? But it doesn't mean that you're qualified to take that job. So what's the best way to sustain yourself in that position, right? Because let's say you are fraud, right? And you're just trying to make your way through, right? And, you know, you've given a really good interview, you've used all your keywords, you know, you've done your research on who's interviewing you, you know what they're like, what their little tendencies are, what kind of things they really like. You know, you've done all your interview prep, you've got your job, great job. You know, like you managed to secure it. They didn't ask you any good in-game stuff, really good, right? Like, thank God. Okay, so you've now been given an academy team. What is the best way for you to keep your job, right? Because, you know, fake it until you make it, right? I mean, the best way is that you create a team which is very which has a lot of veterans on it. You know, yep. They're guaranteed to have good performances because, you know, they have veterans. You you're very nice to your players, right? So they have a very good impression of you. And, you know, maybe you're not teaching them much about in-game, but, you know, he's a really good guy. He gets us coffee and things like that. And then you get your job, and people, maybe in the future, when you want to go to, when one of these players you work with, they get an opportunity on an LCS team, they come and say to the team, oh, I really want that guy who was really nice to me back in the day. I want him on the team as a coaching staff. And, like, to be clear, this happened once on EG, where a player basically came into this. I'm not naming the names of the player or the coach.
No. It's not important.
But I did the basic interview that we did for academy coaches, right? Which is there's kind of, it's a case study. There's 8 points in the case study. 5 of them there's like a blatantly correct answer. 3 of them I don't care what answer you give. Like, I just care about the logic behind your answer. And, you know, even if you do something completely wild, I don't care, right? Okay. But there's 5 which are basic. And this guy got every single question of the 5 wrong. And in 3 of the points, 3 of the things he couldn't argue his point twice. Once he kind of did, he kind of smudged it, and then later on in the interview, he kind of, like, because he thought that I wanted to hear it, kind of implied that it was okay to use like physical force on a player if they weren't like listening to you. And I don't think he actually believed this, right? Like, I think that he just wanted, because of what because I was saying it, I was phrasing the question in a way that made it seem that I wanted to hear that as an answer when I'm just testing. I'm testing your morals and ethics as a coach. And, like, obviously the first thing I said is, you can't hire this guy, right? Like, I mean, there's no way you can hire this guy. And obviously the player was really frustrated, and, we found a compromise. But how can, like, it's really insulting if a player comes to you and says, hire this guy to be your assistant coach, and he, like, the guy understands literally nothing about the game. I mean, it's really, really rough. So yeah, I mean, so I think that's an issue. And when people say that coaches have no authority in North America, I think it's more that they have. It's not about, so authority is part of it, but it's about accountability, right? Like, I think that in North America, there's a lot of people that have input, right? Management. Not saying any particular team, right? Management has input. Players have input and things like this, but the entirety of the accountability is on the coach, which is fine if the coach has agency to do what they want, right? Like, you can have systems where the coach has full accountability, full agency. Doesn't mean that they have to be like an authoritarian coach. They can delegate that accountability, they can delegate that responsibility. But in North America, your options to delegate are limited, and your authority is repeatedly undermined. Or just in general, right? Not on a particular team, right? Because everyone has the solution for what NA is just randomly missing, right? And this, I think, makes coaching in North America very, very interesting. It's like very, very unique. And I'd heard a lot of these things. So I'm going to be honest. I was a coach that always wanted to coach in North America, because I heard all of these rumors from outside. Oh, there's no talent in North America. Oh, everything is completely doomed. Everything is like complete shithole, right? It's the dream as a coach, right? You want to come here. You want to say, okay, right? Like, you put the worst situation for me. I can come up with a solution to this, and it's going to be great, and everything's going to be great. And it was worse than you can possibly imagine. That's what I would do. I mean, like, I couldn't. Maybe okay. I've got one spicy thing, which
right.
I've never told before, and I think I can say this. So there was a situation with JoJo where JoJo was going to be promoted coming into 2022.
Okay.
The agent of one of the other players who was rumored to be taking JoJo's spot. Like a very experienced player. I'm not going to say who the agent is. I'm not going to say who the player is. When he had nothing bad to say, but when he heard that through the grapevine that EG were planning to promote JoJo, just out of nowhere, he tried to get me fired from EG because he thought that somebody else in that position would choose his player instead. And that is something.
Cool. I mean, I could even guess the player and the agent by what's it, or
I think we all know the answer.
I just know a few agents that are definitely in the mix on that one.
And what I would say is, like, that. I mean, obviously, like, EG didn't fire me, but, like, I have never seen something like that. I've literally never, like, I mean, that is That is unlike anything that you can possibly imagine. And the funny thing is that this agent, like, after we won the title, like, he was the first person to congratulate me on it. I was just sitting there.
Course.
Did you think that what you did? Like, I mean, that is that. Yeah. Okay. So that's a bit of spice. That's a bit of spice.
By the way, a couple of points on this actually. I was thinking of when you were talking there. One is, even though, as you were saying earlier, like there isn't really like a progression that people can show their worth as a coach in NA, and therefore the top people filter through. And obviously, the interview process sounds pretty scuffed if no one ever checks that you actually know what you're talking about and just lets you say things without any sort of like grounding in what you're saying. Right? Obviously, there is no import cap on coaches, as you yourself have proved. So, in theory, you would think this is why people have to be careful with like one angle only. You would think the solution is just import coaches. But spoiler, they've already done that with like top Koreans that didn't work. So it's not as simple as just go to the RLs or the LEC and get like the obvious one would be get like Coach Carter from Misfits. Look, he did a great job in LEC, right? Here's why that won't work, guys, because it ties into what he said before about culture. They're going to come over and their whole skill set is, I've coached Koreans, I've coached Europeans, and they're going to get these NA players and they're going to go through all the experience Peter's just had of like the differences and how they behave. Because one thing, I'll give a quick analogy I want to give here of how it sounds like the coaching angle works to me, because I've known some really brilliant, not just players, but coaches that have gone to NA, and they've told me some horror stories, mate. So it reminds me of this story I heard, which is, you know, if you go to Korea, there are tons of foreigners there who are from like America, UK, Europe in general, and all they do as a job, because they just want to live in Korea, is they're English school teachers, right? People have heard this famously, ESL language teachers, right? But what people don't know is this, and I knew a couple, and they told me this is what it was like. You're thinking, because Koreans are like super diligent in school and they all want to be like, you know, fucking like next level. You're thinking it's like that. No, they told me most of them are teaching little kids, and it's a thing where it's like something that happens, like the parents come and drop the kids off, and then you just do that for a bunch of hours, and at the end they come back. But here's the problem. They told me actually the kids often weren't even doing a very good job learning, and you weren't teaching them much, because instead of it being like a super strict class like elsewhere, these kids, like, they'd be all rowdy and they'd be all talk. So what you do instead is it became like a meta where, because you don't want the kid at the end to complain to his parents and say it's shit, you just like play games with them all day, and you barely like even making it hard. And what you sort of is you're like a glorified babysitter, but the parent gets to think like, oh, my kid's learning English as well. Because the reason someone told me this story is because I kept saying like, how has everyone got so scoffed English though if they're all doing like these classes? And that's what they told me. Well, the problem is, you can see where I'm going on this. This is the vibe I got from some of my friends who went and coached in NA. They were like, oh, I thought I was going to walk in and be like, right, no one's ever fucking coached in this region. Like, lay down the law. Like, this is what we're doing. And then he found what actually happens is, if I want to keep my job, right, either I've got to win the league, or all these players have to give me like sort of a good review to the boss. They have to tell me like, yeah, I really like that guy. Like, he's legit, keep him, you know. They were telling me there's way too much like babysitting like that in that regard. You know?
It's also true that at least if you don't invest the power into your coaches, then when the players get angry because they're getting harsh criticism, and then they go to, you know, the NA team, again, going back to what Peter said earlier about there not being there's no next man up. So if a really famous player is like, wow, this coach is being mean to me, you got to get rid of him or I'm leaving. Well, the org is to be like, well, you're our entire brand, because we don't have a brand and we don't have anybody to replace you that's good enough. And so goodbye, coach. Like, so it makes it very, you have very little power, I think, as a coach invested within you, because there's always the threat that the person who makes the sponsorship money, which again is going to be the very famous player with a lot of longevity. And it's not that this isn't true in sports as well. Like, there are obviously very many professional athletes that have gotten coaches shit canned because they are one of the most famous players in the game and they don't want to take this criticism. So it's not unique, but if you don't have enough talent beneath them and enough rising talent within the ecosystem, those players have a lot more leverage.
Yeah, but also I think there's a sub point to this, which is that if you put players in a position with that kind of agency and that kind of power, it changes the incentive for how the team plays on stage as well, right? Like, if everyone on the team knows that if they get on the bad side of this player, they're going to be cut. You know, it's going to change how your jungler paths. It's going to change how your shot calling works. You know, it's going to change a lot of things if it's done in a cynical way, right? And there've definitely been, from the stories I've heard in North America, some people who've known they've had that power and used it to basically live a very easy life and look very good themselves. Now, I don't think this has happened too much in recent years, although I can't say, like, I don't know every single team in every single kind of environment. But yes, basically, short answer, that kind of thing has happened in North America. And I think, like, it's interesting because when you've had teams like that in Europe, it hasn't necessarily worked out that badly. But in North America, I don't think there's ever been a situation where it's worked out very, very well. Like, sometimes it's worked out well, right? Again, I don't want to say all coaches are rubbish. Again, like, I think it's not enough it's about opportunities to improve yourself, right? Like, how do you get better? Like, there's a lot of smart people around esports. There's a lot of not smart people around esports too, but there are smart people there, but they don't have the opportunity. They don't have the opportunity to improve, and they're not put in positions where, like, it sometimes even winning isn't enough, right? Like, so you can win the league. And then, because you didn't win the league in the right way, that's split as a failure. And like...
Can you give an example what you mean by that? Like, what kind of a weird... Is it like, what do you mean by that? Like, what would the other factor be that would impinge on it?
So let's say... I have to be really careful to avoid thinking about how... Okay. So let's say the owner of a team has an idea for how the team is supposed to play or how the team is supposed to win, right? And
as in play through a certain player or something like that, you mean?
A certain player play a certain style, it's not... They don't want their team to scale to 40 minutes and win in North America because that's not the way to win, right? So even if you win games playing this style, and you say you win a championship playing this style, right? That's not enough. Like, because you didn't win the league playing in a way that is, a style that is commonly accepted to be the best way to play by people, who have a tangential understanding of how to play league, even though it's a style that suits your players, that's still enough reason to condemn you. And that's something, like, maybe I've just been lucky with owners in other regions, but I've never had an owner that gave a shit about how the team won as long as they won. But apparently amongst certain people within North America, that is, or it can be something like, you have to look after a player in a certain... I don't know. I don't think I've heard of something like that. Yeah, it's more about play style, or it's about, like, don't be too harsh on people or something like this, right? Like, that kind of thing. So it's like trying to win on hard mode, right? That's what I would say. It's not only... Winning is not enough. You must win in an appropriate way that is the current flavor of the week. Sorry, yeah, I know it's quite funny, but
you're also dealing with people that don't understand necessarily the current meta or the way that the game has evolved, right? Because even if these people were formerly professionally involved in the scene, like, they've moved on to other responsibilities and can't live and breathe the game anymore. So they're relying on a lot of old knowledge, right? And that knowledge may not be effective anymore. The game might have changed, or the player might have changed, right?
I'll also say as well, I do think, like, a few people in the scene have also been able to perversely probably skew this perception. Like Jack and Reginald. Reginald was a pro player and had a very close relationship with his star player for a long time. And Jack has just probably done the best job ever of being a GM and owner and, like, partial coach and all. So like, if the others all look at them and go, oh, I can do that as well. You can't. You almost certainly cannot do that and do not have the skill set or background to do it. And those guys are 10 years deep doing it, and spoil it doesn't even work for Reginald anymore as it is. And now he's actually even prohibited by Riot from doing that. So there's not many people that can do that approach. So I'm amazed at that part though, dude, because that's the one part that kills me, is that's how you know that some of these people, even as an owner, have a very different idea of what an owner is. Like, to me, if you're an owner, you buy the right coaching staff and then empower them and go, right, well, my decision was the coaching staff I hired. After that, if I did a good job, I let them do their job. I don't come in and go, whoa, what are you doing here? Like, whoa. It's not like fucking teaching someone how to play pool where you're behind them, like, look, you just take the shot like that. Like every scene in every romantic comedy ever where they're over the back of that obviously very salacious fucking innuendo implied position. Like, that's crazy that owners having this much say, because that's ridiculous, Peter. The idea that, like, what do you think? Pretty good, eh? Winning the title. You didn't do it how I told you to. It's like, what? Listen, listen, boy, we ain't about scaling around here. We're about getting in there and rootin' tootin' shooting early on. Like, what are you talking about? Why are you some Jerry Jones motherfuckers ruining the whole league?
I mean, it sounds too much like I'm talking about EG here. Like, to be clear, this isn't an EG thing, right? Like, this is but it's like a, how can I think of a benevolent way? Like, don't C9 even publicly laugh at themselves for this? They're like the Jack and his systems, right? That doesn't even.
Oh yeah, they make it a meme. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah. So I mean, the fact that it's a meme and everyone's laughing at it, and I see what you did there. Like it gives you an idea that Cloud9 are ahead of the ball, right? They know they.
Uh-oh. It's all right. I'm sure
Reginald heard he was given too many compliments of Cloud9. He hit the kill switch.
He busted through the wall like the Kool-Aid man, like he usually does.
As a whole, this kind of thing never comes out, right?
No, okay. You liked the second there, just froze, right? You said that Cloud9's ahead of the ball, and then it froze.
Oh, so Cloud9's ahead of the ball. Like, they know that this stuff is going to come out because of LS. Okay, we're going to be ahead of it. We're going to laugh at ourselves. Aha, it's very, very funny. Everyone in the scene understands it's very funny. So they get to laugh at themselves, right? But I'm going to say that, like, this isn't the only, like, Cloud9 are not the only team that are like this, right? I
think at least the difference with Cloud9 is that they have proven success with the things that they do. And while Jack is constantly around the team and like watching the team, he doesn't really take any part in terms of like strategic discussions. Like he knows his place very well. And, he's an older guy who can handle a lot of like interpersonal conflicts. And like, I mean, just look at it. Like, he empowered a very young coach in Max Waldo, and he has a very young coaching staff, but he knows what he doesn't know. And he serves more of like that kind of like Korean style head coaching role where it's about managing personalities and making sure that there's a good environment surrounding these people and that they're living relatively healthy lifestyles rather than being hands-on with strategy.
Exactly. But the thing is that then Cloud9 finds success with this model, then everyone wants to be Cloud9, right? And not everyone is sitting in on every scrim like Jack is sitting on, right? Like I've heard things from Cloud9 where Jack will just be sitting in on the scrims. He's not saying anything. He's just there absorbing knowledge, seeing how things are running today, and being filling in a role similar to head of coaching staff role, where you just come in and you be the final arbiter in issues of dispute. And that's obviously a good system, right? Like, it's an example of this system doesn't always have to not work, but when people see the Cloud9 system and want to be Cloud9 without going through all the steps that you need in order to be Cloud9, right? Because being Cloud9, you can't just wake up one day and be like, I want to be Cloud9. Like, I mean, it takes time to get there, right? And it takes many, many steps. So that's all I would say on that.
Yeah, and I would say that Jack's attention to the League of Legends team in particular caused him to have to, delegate a lot of parts of his company's operation to other people. It's something that he's very passionate about, particularly with his LoL team, but he only has so many hours in the day, and he does spend many of them in season, like very meticulously managing the LoL team. And he does empower other people to do kind of the same thing. I know I
think that's why it was implied they got also grooved to the CSGO team, Monty, that you wanted someone to run that in the same way as Dan Fiden was doing it before, I think.
Yeah, well, Dan Fiden was running more of the business stuff for C9, but as far as I know, one of the reasons why Groove was so desirable to Jack was because, especially having somebody of like a more senior level in Europe to manage teams, and he has done an excellent job of that. For those of you guys who don't know, Groove is the former like Moscow 5 Gambit manager who also coaches the CSGO team. And was part of the transition from Gambit. But yeah, has league history as well.
That's what I want to know. I would think maybe a last topic we could talk about to wrap up here would be, right, no one knows yet, obviously, all the off-season and all that jazz, Peter, in terms of who's going where. But like, one key detail we do essentially know is that Odoamne is leaving Rogue, and maybe he's going to Excel. That's the rumor now, obviously. Right? What do you think on that angle? Because I have to say, as much as like I understand there are business considerations and not every player agrees and all that, That feels, I've got mad blue balled now. Like, I've been watching Rogue with this core for all these years. Finally, they have a year where they come second. They almost won the first split. Then they do win the next split in epic fashion. They go to Worlds, round of 8. They're beating all these Asian teams. I don't even get a run back at one split. I can't have one run. I can't just see what would have happened. What do you think on that angle? What have you thought of the Rogue rise and then the fact that we're not going to see that lineup again?
I mean, what I would say about that is, maybe you bring up a player and they can to replace Odo, and he can be that rookie can be a great player. He can be another Odo, right? He could even be another Odo.
It is an interesting.
In the best case scenario, yeah, maybe he could be like Odo Amne is now, but just way less experience. You're right, yeah. That would be great. As well. Now, if people don't know, the sad thing is they don't know your sense of humor, Peter. They don't know you were being sarcastic when you said that. They actually thought you were being serious. Like, it's all right, fans. I'll clue you in.
Well, I mean, I think like it's interesting to talk about Shigenda maybe going into that team, because clearly they must think that they want more options to play carry or like high resource top laners, but it definitely runs a pretty massive risk of then having too many cooks in the kitchen. And the great thing about Odo Amne is that you can really like empower and feed your ADC and your mid lane, and that Odo Amne is going to provide a very stable foundation to build off of that. And he knows what kind of player he is, and he plays to that. So it's a potential. I mean, the potential reward is obviously high, but managing a less experienced player with an unknown upside, which also might take away from the upsides that you currently have in mid and bot, is bold, especially when you just won.
I mean, what I would say about that is I do think Shigenda was the best top laner. Let me make sure I'm not missing anyone. No, I think it's fair. I think Shigenda was at worst a top 2 top laner in the RLs, right? So they're going to do it. Fine. Shigenda is the one to do it for. The question you have to ask is, obviously, Shigenda is a very different type of player from Odo, so it's going to fundamentally change how the team functions as a unit. Also, there are rumors that, there were rumors that Rogue were one of those teams that were interested in Elyoya, right? So what you would do if in that kind of a case is, Elyoya and Shigenda being very high resource players, because that's what the Rogue rumor in the offseason. It was Malrang out and Odo Elyoya, but maybe that's just because of Ibai coming in. But you'd have had now 5 high resource players. Now you only have 4 high resource players, and Trimby is a high resource player for support. Right? His champion pool requires you play towards bot side, so it will be interesting to see how they balance it out. Can it work? Sure, it can work. I think it's really harsh on Odo because Odo did a lot of stuff. So one thing is, Odo was a player in his career that always struggled in playoffs, and his record in best of 5s was not very good over the course of his career. But it was very, very obvious. You listen to any of the voice comms from that final, he is the one who is leading the team, keeping the team focused, and being the emotional heart of that team. And you kind of you look at Worlds, okay, and you have Odo trying to keep things light and be funny. And then who is now going to be the leader of the team? It's not Larson, because Larson that's not his personality. Larson is a very, very good player, but that's not the type of personality.
He's a quiet guy.
Is it Malrang? Probably not. As far as I know, his English isn't insane, so he's not going to be the leader of that team. So it's either Comp or Trimby, right? And look, Trimby tweeted after he lost a game with Nasus support and was getting flamed on Twitter in the middle of the World Championships, flaming people for not liking his pick. Rogue didn't win a single game after that tweet. Right? Like, that's just
by the way, if you listen to the comms of him, even though I think he's a brilliant player, on the comms, they're always telling him, like, calm down, like, stop shouting, like, you're going too harm, basically. So I actually don't even know if he has the temperament for that role, mate.
So maybe it's comp. I know nothing about comp, right? So I don't know, right? But whenever you bring veterans into a team with rookies, it's basically the veterans team, right? Like this, which I think players don't really get. If I say to a veteran, come and join this team, which is full of rookies, it's because I think I want to make you the leader of the team. I'm telling to you, you will have a huge amount of agency in this team to shape the team how you want to play it, right? And this is something
you had this with Vizicachi and Splice, right?
Exactly, right. And this is something with Impact and Inspired on EG, right? Like obviously Jojo and Danny were fantastic players, right? But who is the core of the team? It's the veterans on the team who decide the culture, right? Like as a coach, I can recommend things on the culture, but I can't force you to interact with people in the other, outside of the game. I can't force you to like look after people when they're sad. That's something you as a veteran have to do. But essentially, I'm saying you're the veteran of the team. I believe in you to lead this team. I believe in you to lead this project, right? Now, if you take away a veteran from a team, what's naturally happening is you're giving the team to somebody else, right? And who are Rogue giving that team to? And that will be very interesting to see, because again, I don't know anything about comp. Like I've literally never interacted with the guy. I assume he's perfectly reasonable guy. But the Trimby thing, there is a time and a place for doing stuff like that tweet that he did, and that time and a place is after the day of games when you have finished playing your games. And even
as a reminder, this was on the day where they had 3 games, and it was between their first game of the day, or their second game of the day, and their last game of the day, and before their tiebreaker.
Exactly, right? And there is no way that like didn't impact his teammates. There's no way. It's impossible, right? Like,
also, why the fuck are you on Twitter between your games? Like,
yeah, maybe.
Implied, by the way, he's reading Twitter replies. Exactly.
Of course, yeah. No, like literally after that game, he's like, I wonder what the plebs think about my support Nasus. Oh, now's the time to get triggered, I guess.
But the funny thing is, like, you can have sometimes, like, I remember sometimes Humanoid back in the day would watch tweets, would look at things between games because he loved the haters and he would feed off the energy, right. And those kind of guys, okay, fine. But if you're not that kind of a guy, then
yes,
then I think that's not a problem. Okay. Yeah. So I guess that's that.
I'm also shocked. I'll just say I'm also shocked on the Malrang angle as well. Like that was like the entire fucking soul of how they played the game was through that guy, and they're just firing him after 1 year as well. Brilliant. Cheers. All right, fucking hell. Okay.
I mean, he's a super unique player too, and from our conversations with Odoamne this year and other players on Rogue, they seem to be really happy with his performance because of how much he would sacrifice for the lanes. Odoamne talked about it on this show, the difference between playing with Inspired and Malrang, and his preferences. It was such a wild thing to happen in the first place that little crazy. Yeah, Peter. Any final words here? I know why you're here is you tweeted that you were dying to get this stuff off your chest. So always happy to provide you a forum to have these conversations. Are there any other points that you wanted to bring up?
I mean, what I would say is that for a region like North America, this is just my academic opinion as an outsider, who's probably never going to work in North America again. So I don't care about burning bridges. What I would say is, if you were a potential pro or somebody looking to go pro in North America, there were a whole generation of players which had potential, which were not given those opportunities, right? For the academy stuff that we talked about earlier, about how the academy incentive structure, right, for coaches that wanted to work with academy teams. For the fact that just being from another country means that you're automatically a better, just being an import means you're better, right? Like just because I really don't want to call players, but just because you are a certain mid laner import, right, means just because you're not from North America means that you're automatically better than a North American player who could be given that spot. And, in many cases, that was fair. With something like Perks, maybe there was nobody in North America like Perks at the time, so it kind of makes sense, but that's not how it worked across the entire system, right? So when you have a whole generation in this kind of way that is lost, it makes it very hard to rebuild it again. And there are kind of incentive structures that are being put in place to allow that to happen, right? And those, why should you, as a young NA player, grind if you know that your grinding is not going to be rewarded, or is not even going to be recognized, or is not even going to be acknowledged, right? And the entire point of things like Proving Grounds and Champions Queue and things like this is to give people the option to go and rise up within those systems without forcing them to go through like an academy system, right? Where who you know may be just as important as what you know or your play skill, right? And that kind of thing. But the problem is that that the fact that it's been mismanaged for 5 years has basically put an entire like you can't just recover this like overnight, right? And that I think is a problem in North America, and I think that there's no easy solution. And the more people just try to say is, oh, it's this one easy solution that will fix all of your issues, the more that you ignore the structural issues and the incentive structures to find success in North America. And that's those kind of things. Until you fix those, it's going to be very hard for North America to find any kind of success, unless they can continue to buy things. And has that even been that successful? It's an interesting question to ask. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear you chirping.
Well played.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay.
Have a lovely vacation, man. You deserve it.
Thank you so much. Okay. See you.
Bye.
Right, we're back for viewer questions. Just to reiterate, if you didn't hear earlier, esports bet if you use our referral link, has the classic 50% deposit bonus on up to 200 USDT. Right, and spoiler, because obviously, remember, there is a marketing element to this. Like, Monty did put 25k on T1 to win that fight. What did you think of it? Did you actually, that dawn on you when you realized they were losing? Like, wait a minute. Because like everyone thought it was a sure thing, didn't they? Did it dawn on you at all?
Yeah, I mean, probably because it was only like 1.2 odds. I probably just sort of, because I put the money on DRX in the previous match against Gen.G, put like $500 and won like 3,000 or something because the odds were just they were like 5.
Oh, you should have at least done like a hedge, maybe. You know what I mean? Like done a tiny hedge, maybe.
Look, man, I was like busy with that pre-show. So it's by the way, guys, it was money that I lost money for you, okay? Because all that money was gonna, the money goes back into prizes and stuff for you guys. So it was esports bets that gave us that money. I'm sorry I lost.
And we said as well, here's the other thing. When we did this, we said, since we're going to lose sometimes, we're not only going to laugh at it because it's funny anyway, but we're going to show that, like, guess what? We don't win all the time. Like, just because people are experts also doesn't mean you win all the time in betting as well. So you should be aware that's a consideration. That's why you never bet more than you can lose.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you can look at previous episodes, join our Discord for Last Free Nation. GROGcoin Lounge is a pin post to get 25 GROG coins, etc. Monty and Thorin, which piece of media do you find yourself returning to most often? That's a good question. Probably in terms of literature, poetry, because it's easier to return to that most frequently. So I would say things like Greek or Norse mythology for me, poetry by William Blake, or Keats. Or Shelley, Yeats, these kind of authors. In terms of, I don't know, movies, TV. Oh, Shakespeare, obviously, as well. Always Shakespeare. I mean, I've seen, especially going to theater, I will always go watch more Shakespeare. And I've seen, Macbeth many different times, but many plays many different times. In terms of TV and movies, probably some of my favorites are like Kurosawa movies. So like Yojimbo's one of my favorites that I always like to go back to. Some film noir like The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca. I guess with TV shows, probably the TV show that I've seen the most time is Deep Space Nine, which I personally very much enjoy. I think I've seen it, the whole thing, like 3 times now, which, considering it's 7
episodes. You know, part about that's made it mega underrated. I was never like a huge fan, but that's because I watched it when it first came out. But what I didn't realize when I watched it when it first came out is if you watch it as just like a standard sci-fi, it's actually not that great because it's obviously all about the political intrigue and stuff. But that actual like storyline where I can only use like Star fucking craft terminology because I don't remember the show from all those years ago.
Right. Yeah,
but that whole storyline they had with sort of like the other race of like those super like next level alien, that's actually mega if you go back now. No, they were called something else. I can't remember. Like it was like the equivalent in StarCraft to like the fourth race or whatever the fuck, you know what I mean? Like the Zelnaga or whatever, you know. What were they? I can't remember what they were called in that. You know those ones that are, spoiler, sort of like an angel inside like a vac suit or whatever. You don't find that out till years later. And every person would see the creature as a different fucking god from their religion or whatever.
The prophets, yeah.
Yeah, that part was super interesting.
Aliens,
that sort of, that part like was just lurking in the background the whole time. That's actually mega interesting when you look at it now,
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's aged extremely well, actually. And I like, you know, I love Next Generation as well because it's episodic and like I love the philosophical implications of Next Gen. But what I really liked about DS9 was that it was rooted in one place and it really like dove into like the history of Bajor and the oppression by the Cardassians. And it was like this, you know, backwater planet that suddenly became the most important spot in the galaxy because they discovered the wormhole next to it.
I've just realized I actually was talking about Babylon 5.
Oh, Babylon 5, which also I've heard. I haven't seen Babylon 5.
No, in my brain, I for some reason in my brain, because it's a similar concept, I actually thought, I didn't hear you say Deep Space Nine, I thought you said Babylon 5 for some reason. I was going to say, why was he not getting it? That's such a fucking obvious plotline, but that'll be why then. I was totally off on that.
Anyway, so I return to that one a lot. Do you have any pieces of media that you return to?
Yeah, I'll give you one for like 3 different domains. So for movies, it's easy. It's the movie Clerks by Kevin Smith. I've seen that. That's easily the movie I've seen the most times in my life. Funny. Now, spoiler, half of them at least, I was high. So that's like, there's a crutch involved there. It is a very good movie for that time. It's also just a really good movie. Like, it's one of those movies where it's amazing this was the guy's first movie because the amount of the jokes that still work and so many of the scenes, like the comedy acting is so like intuitive because these aren't famous actors in a lot of cases. Like, it's just so good in that sense. In terms of TV, it's easy. It's Seinfeld. I could easily go back. Yeah. I'll probably rewatch that another million times.
TV for another show. Well, I'm so dumb. Futurama is definitely way up there for me. The number of times I've seen fucking Futurama is probably more than anything else. Anyway, continue.
And then for music, the easy answer would be Boards of Canada. But part of that is also that I have sort of warped my mind on that, which is, first of all, that music, if you like that style, has like a super emotional resonance anyway. That's sort of like a comforting, nostalgic feeling. But also, I also listened to it on like 1 billion flights and falling asleep on flights and with like a mix that was there. So I have also, in some fucked up sense, like programmed my brain to have all the grooves of exactly every part of those tracks. So like the joke is that is like my religion now at some point. So I probably went too far on that. I even know that. Like, I'm glad I don't have that feature you all do. Like, I don't use Spotify, so I'm a boomer. So I don't know, thankfully, how many plays I've done of those tracks. Otherwise, it might be disturbing.
Monty, last episode, you correctly mentioned how soccer sucks. What are some of the other ways in which it is terrible? So I mentioned about their horrible way of breaking ties, which, by the way, here's the way that every soccer fan is like, well, Monty, they couldn't actually, play any more soccer because it would be impossible to physically do it. Well, how about you create a game that doesn't result in ties being commonplace and you increase scoring? Here's what I would do. Well, first off, you could have more substitutions, but frankly, there are too many people on the fucking field. I would reduce the number of the people on the fucking field so that you actually have more scoring and an individual player has more impact on the field. Also, you could create substitutions like you have in many other sports like hockey, because hockey can have infinite overtimes, at least in the playoffs, right? Where you don't actually have to go to a shootout, which doesn't include any of the skills that you've used to that point in the game.
Also, remember, the unique thing about football is when you do a substitution, that is it. The player can never come back. Whereas, like, I would maybe suggest something akin to what they have in, like, the NBA and the rest, where you can bring them on, you can bring them back on the field. Because then you could, like, rest someone, and then you could use them. Whereas the problem is, like, famously, like, as a result, you just let your star player get tired because you're not taking him off, are you? What if you need him in the last 5 minutes to score a goal?
Yeah, no, look, guys, you can like soccer, but it's a really, like... It's really just a terribly constructed sport. And before you call me an American, like start talking about how I'm American or whatever, I also hate baseball. So because baseball is a team game where 90% of the action is a 1v1 between a pitcher and the batter. It is horrendously boring.
Here's the thing. I don't think actually like football's as bad as I would have said a few years ago. I got back into it the last few years. Like the modern game has developed a lot, but the problem it has in general is it's like you say, it's basically like the scoring is there's almost like an arbitrary element to it. Like you can actually be the better team. You can outplay them in a lot of ways. You can get unlucky on 2 chances on goal that you have and you don't win. Whereas the other team scores 1 goal off a fluke. Like that has too much impact. Whereas the reason I immediately fell in love with the NBA is you're taking like 100 shots or whatever. So it's like, right, of the 100 chances, like, okay, this time we made 80. Well, not, you never make 80, but 80% or whatever, like the difference is it's like, it's more different opportunities to succeed. It's not as framed in these one massive moments. And unfortunately, I've just learned this about humans. Humans cannot know that in advance and still look through the same model. They will always, at the end of a game, think whoever won played better and whoever scored the goal was a hero and he did it right and the one who didn't is a loser. Like, they can't. So unfortunately, sports like that, I actually think you get tortured in it if you don't win.
Right. And also, I think that's just a badly designed sport if that happens with any degree of frequency, because if you're trying to test who is better at the game, you should come up with that that opportunity more often than not.
The one thing I will say is this. I do think, though, that as a sport, its main strength, this is why I know people are just shit at arguing, mate, because the joke is they never say this to me. The best argument you can make for football is basically that it is such an intuitive sport. Like, it's a lot more artistry than it is like a coach coming up with all the tactics that you overlays. Like the NFL, absolutely. There's a reason why the great coaches, like, they're way more important than majority of the players on the field. It's the opposite in football. Like, the players are the geniuses. The midfielder guy's the guy who creates the run, and then what the striker does, no one could train that guy to do that. You know what I mean? There's a lot more sort of intuitive brilliance. So I can see why it has an appeal to some people.
Look, man, I'm just saying soccer would be better if it was 8v8 instead of 11v11. That's my take. And also we basically fixed the penalty shootout problem because we would have far fewer ties. There, I fixed soccer for you guys. You're welcome. If Riot stopped making new champs, it wouldn't reduce the already large barrier to entry. What they could do is lower the barrier with better onboarding. Yes, this is true. I agree with you. What do you think Riot could do to strike this balance between onboarding and an ever-changing game? So they need to figure out how to get Smurf accounts out of that system. I don't know how you do that. I think it's really difficult, but I think that you need like a newbie lobby or a newbie ladder system that you can somehow keep the Smurfs out of. If you can have that, then I think it'll be a lot more fun and pleasant for people to be able to do this game. But I have no idea how you would accomplish that.
I said this years ago. One of the biggest problems League of Legends has, I think, is just people's ego entitlement and, quite frankly, being selfish. They invented a mode called normals, and no fucking person uses it except for when they're trying to play with their fucking cousin that they don't want to ruin the LP with, or like the girl that they're trying to date who's in the fucking gaming scene. If you've never played a champion, why are you first timing it in solo queue? You should play a bunch of normals. If you just want a game for fun because it's going badly in your solo queue games, play a few normals. Like, why the fuck is normals? Like, we act like it doesn't exist. And so what happens is you have all these dickheads in fucking bronze or whatever who are just wasting everyone's time playing a game. And they're like, that's why when they do that thing, this is the one thing I'll never agree with everyone on Reddit on. You know, when they all go, wow, so toxic. It's just a game, bro. No, that's normals, dickhead. Go into normals and you can do whatever you want. If you're playing in my solo queue game, I'm playing, by definition, a competitive game where we're all trying to climb and get better. So it isn't just fun that you pick some stupid shit like new top and then fucking feed the lane, is it? Like, you actually ruined the game. So the problem is they've sort of built already the pressure release valve. Just no one uses it, sadly. So I don't know how you get around that, mate. Because everyone just thinks, who cares?
I think it's an unenviable problem. I think it's there are probably a lot of very smart people at Riot trying to solve that problem, and I have no fucking clue how to do it. Rally.io is having a lot of problems lately. Can you explain how, if at all, this affects, and if you're thinking about alternatives? They're switching their bridge out account right now. But guys, here's the deal. If we do something else for these questions, we will tell you in advance. We're not going to rug pull you. You will get out first, et cetera, et cetera. So just calm down. Which of the following takes infuriates you more? Bengi is the hidden goat. Marin carried Faker, or Bang is greater than Uzi.
Here's the joke. And people are going to think this is mad, right? All of those were popular takes on Reddit at one point in time. All of them. Those were, in fact, at one point, the groupthink consensus. Every single one. They really were. It's wild, isn't it? Because now the joke is, we can all laugh now and look back and go, well, most people, have eased off on those. Those were the takes back then, for sure. So I have to say the easiest one for me is the Bengi one. That's the easiest of them all.
That's the one that infuriates me the most, because it is talking about Faker, who is inarguably the greatest player of all time, and trying to really like dim his glow is deeply offensive. I mean, the same thing could be said about Marin carried Faker, but Marin was amazing in his own way in 2015, and Bang greater than Uzi is crazy. But at least I think now with Deft winning Worlds, I would actually now rate Deft above Uzi on the all-time ADC list. That's my take, at least. So that one doesn't bother me as much either.
I already had Deft to #1 before even he won this, mate.
Don't give a fuck.
Don't give a fuck. Look at his body of work. It's unbelievable.
Hey, man.
It's pretty hard to argue with that longevity.
I think now it's almost impossible to argue.
Yeah.
Among the greatest players in esports, who had a particularly sadistic fetish for humiliating and demoralizing his opponents to a point the losers would consider retirement?
I don't know about the last part. Like, it's not a fucking anime, mate. No one's retiring because of law. Put it this way, an obvious one that comes to mind.
People the most.
An obvious one's Forgiven. If you don't know, Forgiven like played scrims the way he would play those matches where he's just trying to push you. I don't think people get this. Forgiven's not an idiot, by the way. He does know you would win way more games without pushing the lane. He does it because he's trying to show you, I can push your lane in completely. Even if your jungler comes, I'm going to tell my jungler not to come. I'm going to kill your jungler and I'm going to push your lane in even more. And the second, either you're going to be like a bitch under the tower all day, or you're going to have to go base and I'm going to take your tower. Like the whole thing was about mental destruction of the other bot laner. He never even, like that story I've told on this show is why you all have the pipeline for the info. That story I've told about the reason he wouldn't play certain champions is real. Like the reason at one point, Monty, he wouldn't play Kalista before the very end when he did in H2K, even though it was really good in China and even people like Uzi, I would have carry games on it with him, mad damage. Here's the reason why he said, because he said, who the fuck would want to win like that? So he was like the coach, the orders we were talking about in NA. It wasn't enough to win, Monty. He had to win in his exact style and in a way that showed the other laner, not in the other team, the other laner, I'm way better than you, and you better understand that. And like, this is the guy I even know stories of where when he would play Asians in scrims, they would be playing like it was a scrim, and he was like, okay, motherfucker, I've been training my whole... He was like Nick Diaz, like, Conor McGregor, you be taking my whole fucking life from me, motherfucker. Like, this guy was just so driven, so he's a great example. There's someone who's just trying to... It wasn't even about winning the game, it was about sending a message. The meme was real.
Okay, thank you for the Asian drama recommendations. We'll look at those. That's not a question, but yes. Is Peanut the biggest choker in LoL history? I don't.
Well, the joke is, here's the biggest joke. Deft only just got out of that convo, dude. He used to, I think he used to be the biggest choker ever, because the problem is this, Monty. People don't know those EDG teams he came from. They were like looking like the best teams in the world, and they would just wilt at every single fucking Worlds. Like, the amount of times this guy's gone to Worlds with like a top 3-4 team of the sea and just blown it is mental. So I thought he was always the biggest. Peanut's certainly a candidate, though. He's definitely up there.
He's definitely a candidate. Also, any of Score's teammates during playoffs where Score just could play super well and then his entire team would just choke. But I mean, he's up there. I thought Peanut, especially after, showing a lot of mental resilience in terms of coming back in that Game 5 versus Dom1 in the spring playoffs, the way that they dominated the summer playoffs this year, I thought maybe he was over it, but then I watched Worlds and was very disappointed. It is a long-standing tradition that junglers tend to stop going for aggressive plays as much in their latter years. How come laners don't follow this phenomenon?
Have you ever met the mid laners, dude? They all start like, I'm Bjergsen, I'll play Zed and Fizz. Do I fuck? I play Victor and Orianna, baby. They all become that. They all become that guy. The mid laners definitely become like that. I mean, the joke is, see, look at this World's Finals. You know what Monty was talking about earlier? If this was like 5 years ago, of course, Faker would just be like, oh, you play Silas. No, motherfucker, I play Silas. In this time, he's like, no, I just hear my, like, listen, give me the ears here, pick. It's nice. Let's play nice and safe. No one has to get hurt. I think actually most players do. The problem is this, right? In my opinion, when you're young, it's the concept of beginner's luck in a way. When you're young, you don't know what actually the consequences of losing these matches are. So you go, fuck it. Why not just go for my strength? Yeah, I'm going to be ballsy. Yeah, give me that pick. I'm going to dominate this guy. The older you get a bit more calculated. It's like, let's play this smart. Like, what would be like the most consistent by the numbers way to play? I think that's just a natural progression of getting mature, isn't it? Isn't that like a young man to an old man transition?
Sure. Yeah. I agree with that. Is this the biggest esports upset of all time? We did talk about that earlier in the show.
Definitely up there.
What are the biggest contenders? That sounds like some baller off-season content. The biggest upsets in esports history. It's certainly the biggest one in LoL, but we'd have to talk to Thorin about that. Wolf brought up.
There'll be some in StarCraft for sure. Don't
yeah, we talked about
Royal Roaders. Remember, who come from nothing and win the whole championship for the first time.
Right. Wolf mentioned Byun, who is the first teamless guy to win GSL as well. Was a massive upset. So there are some. In light of Deft having won Worlds, how would you rank these title wins as the most satisfying to have watched as a fan? Deft winning Worlds, Oda winning LEC, Kerrigan winning the Major, and Score winning OGN. Man, those are all great. I loved all of those, and 3 of them happened this year.
Here's the problem with that. I would have to say out of all of those, the easiest one is Kerrigan winning the Major, because if people don't know, Deft won, but it's not like he was the best player on the team, and it definitely wasn't all about Deft. Odoan, they won, but in a supportive role because he's a classic weak side player. You know what I mean? Here's the difference. Kerrigan won in the #1 team when all the pressure was to win, when he'd never won in his whole career, and he was a massive part of them winning, like how he called, how he fucking attacked the situation. And even cooler, I always say this is why I'll probably do some content on it. He even won in exactly the way he would have lost every other time. Like in the past, he would have been like a bit nervous and made like the safe call. This time he just went for it. It's almost like he realized from past chances, like maybe you never get another crack at this. So fuck it. When you're in that scenario, instead of going like, let the other guy decide the game, I'll decide the game. I'll go for it. So it was almost like thematically brilliant as well. He actually did it. Like there was, if this was a movie, that would be the final act of the movie. You'd have that as the last scene, and then it would just end when he wins the Major.
You are right, scriptwriter for next year's Worlds. What plot do you make to top this year's? Well, I think it's hard because I think Deft was probably the best player who's never won Worlds, and now that arc has completed, which is fabulous. I think it'd be very hard to top this, and it would depend on which teams end up being created. It's hard to know without knowing what the rosters of some of these teams will be. I would love to see another like Griffin style like rookie team on the up and up suddenly come out of nowhere and like swoop in and be able to actually do real damage, because Griffin obviously couldn't live up to their potential when they went to Worlds, but another narrative like that coming out of either China or Korea would be really quite fun.
Here's mine. Here's how you make it sexy. So first of all, a classic trend to make an epic storyline at Worlds is it has to be a different LPL team that wins. Because since you haven't seen them win yet, it's not like when you see the great Korean team go back to the final. Like then it's expected. Like the damn one story was unsatisfying because they were supposed to win that Worlds. Of course they were. It was supposed to go back to back, and then it would be a dynasty, wouldn't it? So here's the one you need. The obvious player that still hasn't won is Knight, right? So here's what you need to happen next year. Because there's this whole shenanigans going on where apparently like nearly all the players in RNG might leave, and there's some problem going on with the ownership, and there's apparently behind the scenes it sounds like everything's on fire. What you need is this. In the spring, they fuck up the roster. I've heard maybe Zhao who might get trapped there and not leave or some bullshit. Like, so everything goes wrong in RNG, and top esports loses the final of the LPL again. So here's what happens. Because Zhao Hu realizes, look, it just never works bloody out for me in summer, does it? And I've never got it at Worlds. I've won all those MSIs. I've never got it at Worlds. He humbles himself. He joins top and role swaps back to top lane. Nice. And as a top laner, he shot calls it. Him and Knight win Worlds. Here's the scenario, right? It's still, though, really tight because they've got all those aggressive players. And what happens is in the final, it's another 5th game. And in the 5th game, they're about to lose the team fight until Jackie Love jumps into the center of the whole fight and goes like Neo in the Matrix and kills everyone with like Zeri or something or whatever. And then they win off a Jackie Love attempted int. And that's how they win. And again, the movie just cuts to black. That's the end of the movie.
We also, to be fair, haven't gotten the Faker versus Rookie Worlds finals that we
so sad, isn't it? I know.
You know what? Kind of needed that one like 4 years ago, and not now.
No, but that's also the other thing I've always thought's whack about League, unfortunately, is like, here's the thing. I don't think single elim's that great for that, because obviously you only get one chance in the playoffs. The only reason that's happened in CSGO, Monty, is because we had a way smaller scene. You only had like 4 or 5 teams that could win most majors. So yeah, we have had like, you know, the Get Right and Forest against the Fnatic guys, and stuff like Astralis against Virtus Pro. It's actually tragic in League of Legends how rarely you ever have like 2 of the top 3 teams just play in the final. It's whack, isn't it, dude? Like the joke is Deft meeting Faker now was like, oh, cool, they met a second time ever. Like, what? What? They had to play for 10 years to meet twice. What? Like, how are you going to make rivalries off that?
What was the best thing about this final? That Deft finally got the trophy, or that Joe Marsh didn't put his mitts in the cup? Mark Merrill / Brandon.
I hadn't even thought of that angle. If I'd thought of that, Monty, I'd been a lot more consoled that we lost. It's just knowing Joe Marsh doesn't get. Oh, dude! Zeka Pioshik and Deft, you are legends. Because I hadn't realized. I hadn't even thought about it. Imagine how annoying Joe Marsh would get if they actually won Worlds on his dime, Monty. Oh my God! I didn't even thought about that. I'm so glad that did not. Now I'm glad that the DRX won. Fuck it, yeah.
So to be clear about Joe Marsh, I don't think Joe Marsh is like a bad guy. In fact, I know he opposed a lot of the really crappy new LCK contract policies and everything like that. And I think he's done. I think he really cares about his team and his players. What frustrates me about Joe Marsh is that he claims credit for things that he hasn't done, and then also like I don't like how he seems to need the attention of teenagers and is like in the Discord, like in the Discords being weird. It's just like I want him to have more dignity, but I do think that I do think his heart's in the right place, and he does do a lot of good things. Or
it's just annoying is all.
Yes,
he's just annoying. That's all. It's not the end of the world. He's just annoying.
But I don't think I think he is fundamentally a force for good within this scene. You have previously suggested that Crown was one of the worst players to win Worlds. How would you feel about Crown if he had won in 2016 instead of 2017? I
that
guess
was his best year. He was mega then.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I kind of would feel the same regardless, but I don't think it's that.
Oh, fuck, he was mega in 2016.
All right,
that was when his Victor was like unbeatable.
Okay, all right, that's fair.
He was a stud that year.
That's fair. It was also.
So I think it would change his whole narrative. Yeah, it changed his whole narrative.
That's fair. If you're trying to predict World's performance, how good of an indicator was summer split / finals performance historically?
Not really very good. I mean, that's what fucks China every time. The number one seed is the winner of summer, and what does it ever get you? Fuck all, it seems like, right?
Yeah, there was a big meta shift this time too between summer playoffs and Worlds, which is good because the Worlds finals was a lot better. And had we continued with that old format, it probably would have been much more boring.
In fact, here's a stat for you, Monty. I'm just thinking in my head. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I think the only time, I think it was last year with EDG. I think last year with EDG is the only time the number one seed from China, like the winner of summer, made the final. I think it was just EDG ever. Because FPX wasn't there, and I think they'd won in, I think they came through the regional that year. Am I wrong on that one? Maybe FPX won, actually. I'll double check that.
He has some examples. How good were Samsung White before they won in summer? They lost to Samsung Blue twice in a row in semifinals. Samsung Blue was the on-paper favorite for that year. I called Samsung White before the tournament started because I thought they had powered up enough and like had kind of fundamentally the stronger roster, but Samsung Blue would have been the on-paper favorites. So they wouldn't have been number one. SKT in 2013 was great in summer. Obviously, that summer final was the Faker versus Zed Ryu outplay. They were very strong favorites. So that tracked pretty well. Samsung, Samsung when they won, probably not that good.
That was a mega fluke. They weren't even supposed to get through regionals that time.
Yeah. That was huge. IG, FPX.
IG was the second best team, if people don't remember, the behind RNG.
FPX, the meta shift really favored Doinb's play
They
style.
did win summer, it turns out.
Yeah. Dom1, also expected, I would say. EDG, I don't think that's that big of a fluke either.
Yeah, but everyone says that now, Monty. No one was saying EDG was going to win Worlds. I'm telling you, go back and look. Everyone said FPX and fucking
sure.
Whatever,
I mean, FPX really shit the betting groups. That's true. Yeah, I guess EDG was kind of fluky. So after going over those, it's like 50-50. Oh, also there's two different SKTs, right? There's 2015 SKT, which was by far the strongest team in summer coming into Worlds. And then they won Worlds they only dropped 2 games the entirety of Worlds. One game. That's right. Just the one game. That's right. The 2022 Worlds meta was arguably the greatest so far. Was this Riot finally figuring out how to do their job? Was it a result of the teams and players present, or was it largely just a coincidence that happened? I think the balance was quite good. I don't know exactly. You in order to know this, you'd have to know what Riot's goals were coming into Worlds, which I don't know. So I can't say whether it was deliberate and how.
Think of the four teams, Monty, that made the semis. You had Jingdong, who literally could just somehow always be behind and then win team fights, even with like 4v5s and stuff. You had T1, who played all those crazy pick comps and those weird like play inside out type scenarios. You had Gen.G, that is just the old school, like win through just farm dominance and then try and just do basic macro moves. And then you had fucking DRX that was doing some like early game shit into like, if we get a foothold, then we just gradually power up through the game and win. Like those are four totally distinct styles. Like that suggests to me the game actually was super hospitable to like the players and the team can sort of pick how they play, right?
Yeah.
And as you said, a key thing you nailed that we didn't actually hit that much on the other episodes of SI at least is DRX also did have like a massive emphasis on going for the fucking dragons, didn't they? They were all about that approach to the game.
Yeah. And also one thing we didn't talk about too is T1 largely abandoned those pick compositions during the finals, which was really odd.
That was a bit weird. That makes me wonder if they were playing DRX before the semis and then they like sort of like thought, oh, they've seen us do this or some shit like that, you know?
Because I would think if you could beat JDG with those kind of compositions, DRX, which is very much, as we talked about with Peter Dunn, kind of a 4-1 or group and let's get it done around dragons or other objectives, like they could have deployed that same style. So I was surprised that we didn't see as much of that. But I think also it's a combination of the meta, but also the teams really had a lot of different styles, especially the good Asian teams this time around. The LPL teams were all quite different from each other. The LCK teams were all quite different from each other. So I think maybe it was just a lot of teams with unique identities combined with the meta that provided it well. But I can't know whether Riot accidentally invented this meta or they were like, here are our goals. And then they're like, oh, these goals came true, because I don't know what their thought process was. Who are the remaining active best players to never win Worlds? Chovy, Knight.
Let me think who else. I mean, if he plays again, Uzi, obviously. Caps.
Sure.
Let me think. Is there anyone else that's obvious? The problem is a lot of people have retired now, obviously. Like there's no Smeb. There's none of those people. Let me think. Khan retired, obviously. Who else would even be in the mix for this? Is there anyone else from LCK we haven't done?
Yeah, not that are active, I don't think. I mean,
I don't know.
Probably like Kaori at this point, but
yeah, Kaori, that's a good one. That's a good show.
He's still really young in his career, so that's why I wouldn't.
Depending on, I didn't watch him as much this year, but Tarzan's pretty good. There's not that many actually, to be fair, when you think it through. I guess a lot of them are retired now, haven't they?
Yep. How likely is it that Zeka regresses?
I don't think anyone could keep that level up. Come on.
So more likely than not, this Worlds meta was hugely beneficial to him and his champion pool. Like, especially because the mid lane probably had the least diversity in terms of picks out of any of the roles that we saw at Worlds. And it kind of perfectly slotted into his wheelhouse, and not even perfectly. Like he played actually Azir quite well in the finals, but like he was not good on Azir.
Oh, he was also though gifted his two champions being ridiculously in the meta as well. That is outrageous. He just got hit in the face with the meta like that. And as you're saying, then people weren't even banning, and they're banning other positions. The other thing I would say as well as this, like this is where you can tell the people who don't watch the LCK, right? The unthinkable thing about that semi-final was that he actually like outlaned fucking Chovy. Like I don't think you guys know, I can shit talk all other aspects of Chovy's game. I did for many years. I will never talk shit on his laning. His laning's he's like a robot that's like the perfect laner, and so that just will never happen again. That was like a once in a million. So I can't even believe that happened.
I mean, look, man, I hope that I'm wrong and Zeka just transcends into like superstar status. I hope I'm wrong, but I can't logically believe that he is going to maintain that level, because eventually he's going to have to do it on different champions. And I think that will be very hard for him. But he also is very young. He's only 19. So maybe he's got a lot of growth left in him.
By the way, tournament form can be like internal of one tournament, and it can be ephemeral. I'll give everyone, if they know old school Counter-Strike, a very quick example. There was a player who played for a team called Jack's Money Crew, who was like an underdog NA team, and he was called Zid. Now, you're not even going to remember that name because he's not a famous player, hence the story. He went to one CPL, Monty, which was the World Championship at the time in Dallas, and he absolutely smurfed. I'm not joking, was the MVP of this tournament. And the team came like third. They didn't even win. And even in the games they lost, he was absolutely smurfing. Now, spoiler, it's enough years later. I've heard he was tweaking on some shit, but okay, that's by the by. But all you need to know is this. He kept playing for many years afterwards. He was on better teams. He was never anywhere close to that player. That was just absolutely a miracle. That one tournament, that 1 week, he was just out of this universe. And then after that, he was just a good player. He was just a good player. He was never even close to that level again. So it can happen, unfortunately.
I also, I suggested to Wolf, I was like, we have to bring back like the Brood War names. And after this tournament, like Zeka, calling him the puppet master, I think is great because he mind controlled people. Like I couldn't believe he mind controlled Scout to just int him like 4 times 1v1 in the last game versus EDG. He mind controlled Chovy to lose lane. Like I don't understand what it is about this guy. And unfortunately, we can't, because we don't have replays and we don't have pro view, we can't really see what was going on in that lane the entire time. So we may never know. But it was weird that a lot of players, whatever he was doing, was baiting them pretty hard into having bad performances. Maybe just
by the way, just because we forgot the name earlier, for people who are watching the VOD, the one name I forgot earlier was obviously Zhao, who hasn't won Worlds. He is a 3-time MSI winner, included in 2 roles. So I'll put that on the list.
Zhao's probably like number 1.
He might be on number 1, yeah.
I'm starting to think DRX is a world-class team. Am I crazy?
No, here's the thing. Here's why you're not, guys. You just watched the whole tournament. Like, if you watched that tournament, you would think that. This is a problem, by the way, that I understand. I'm just a weird person whose brain works differently. Because all of my analyst friends in Counter-Strike, even the guys I do the desks with and talk to privately, they all fall in love with the romance of the last game they saw and the current form at this moment and the story. Like, what they can never do somehow is sort of look and plot and go like, nah, that's a bit of an outlier. They all, if they can do that again in the next map though, Monty, they could do anything. And then it's like, they don't, they go back down, they lose the next map, they lose the third convincingly, the favorite team goes, you know what I mean? Like, and the whole time, and listen, I mean, I'm the smug bastard, like, what did I tell you? Did I tell you or did I tell you? But the problem is, I get it. Like, it's just human nature. People get caught up in the moment. It's understandable. It's why there's that term, prisoner of the moment. It's really hard to escape it.
It's also kind of a joke, this question. It could go a couple different ways, but
is he trying to meme? Because that's what like Reddit would say or something.
No, it's like humorous. Yeah. Or like me, for example, a lot of you guys who didn't watch LCK, you just watched DRX at Worlds. And you're like, wow, this team is very good. But for me, here's what happens in my brain. It goes, I watched all the games of DRX and then I have this conflicting knowledge that they are current world champions, and my brain just short circuits. Like it's impossible for these two states to be true in my head at the same time, and so that's why it's very confusing. But yes, I think it's part of the joke is that you're starting to think that DRX is a world-class team because the belief of that makes you feel like you're going crazy. Like it makes me feel like I'm crazy, which is great. I mean, it's an extraordinary moment in the history of esports. What would be the first thing you chose to learn if you had an infinite amount of time to do so? Well, I try and learn things.
I feel like a language or something would be an obvious one, because if I have infinite time, why wouldn't I?
Yeah, sure.
So maybe like a really complicated language, like fucking Chinese or Mandarin or whatever, something like that.
Yeah.
Korean's a good one too, obviously.
Or I guess for me, because I took more of a literary approach, maybe go back and learn a scientific discipline like astronomy or something like that would be quite interesting, I think. If I had to redo my entire education. I wouldn't change it. Like I wouldn't just trade it for that. But if I had time to do both, that would be pretty cool.
Like what's funny is I won't explain anymore, but I've actually found the one reason that I ever might learn Dutch, because at the moment I have no reason to if you don't know. Like the places I live, everyone can speak English good enough. They even can do all your phone calls in English. Most websites can even have an English section, if not easy. Very the way Dutch translates fantastically through Google Translate as well. It's all super accurate. So in theory, I have no reason right now to have to learn Dutch, but I've found one reason I'm going to make myself do it. Here's why. Because if I'm going to live here, it is worth doing, not least to be polite to the people that you live in there with. You don't make them speak your language all the time. What I'm going to do is, there actually turns out within European comics, there is a really big Dutch comics scene as well, where all the comics are just in Dutch. So not only would it be like the perfect excuse to do it, so I could read all these awesome comics, which aren't like American comics, but they're not superhero comics. They're comics about all sorts of adventure stories and real things. So they're also very different in that sense, and they're quite adult in that regard. There's no porn. I don't mean in that sense. But like the other reason why is like, That way I could it would also be like, it wouldn't be the hardest possible thing to start learning. I could start getting some enjoyment out of it early on. So that's how I'm going to backdoor my way into learning Dutch, I've decided.
There you go. All right, that was the last question. We actually didn't have too many this week. We will be back, guys, with more off-season content. We are going to probably do a lot more, I would say, non-3-hour shows, but more frequent stuff potentially based around roster moves and everything. We'll get back to you with a plan on that coming up. We'll see if we have some longer episodes based around rosters, especially as some of them are officially announced, and we can get potentially interviews with players or coaches about why that roster has been constructed. So we will be active during this off season, and we'll let you know exactly what's going on. So stick with us. Obviously, the best way to do that is to follow Last Free Nation across social media. A lot more short form content will be probably coming out on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter, everything like that. So go there, do that right now. Thanks a lot for watching. Subscribe to our YouTube channels as well. We'll see you.